All right, good evening. Let me call to order this meeting of the City of Bloomington Plan Commission for March 6, 2023. Let's begin by calling the roll, please.
Ballard.
Here.
Burrell. Here. Seaboard.
Here.
Cockrum.
Here.
Kinsey.
Here.
Rodkey.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
St. John.
Here.
And Whistler.
Here.
And Enright Randolph.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. We do have a quorum, so we will proceed. Let me first just give a quick preview of the agenda for this evening. It's a fairly light agenda, maybe not quite as light as last month, but we've got some minutes to approve, reports, resolutions, communications. Two petitions that have been on the agenda that we won't hear tonight. One that's been tabled is SP-24-22. That's 115 East Kirkwood Avenue, Cutters Kirkwood 123 LLC. And petition PUD-DP 24-21 has been continued to the April meeting. That's North Prow Road, the 3500 block of North Hackberry Street. Robert V. Shaw petitioner. We do have one petition tonight, 1225 East Maxwell Lane, Robert Lee and Mariam Etishami. And we have four zoning ordinance amendments on our agenda tonight. So all of that is coming up shortly, but first we will start with the minutes to be approved. We have minutes from the February 6th meeting. Are there any questions or corrections regarding those minutes? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes from February 6th?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Because we do have some remote participants tonight, we're going to call the roll on absolutely everything, just to make sure we've got it, our records nice and neat. So, Jackie, if you wouldn't mind calling the roll on the motion to approve the minutes.
Burrell. Seaboard.
Yes.
Cockrum.
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
Rodkey.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
Whistler.
Yes.
And Ballard.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the minutes are approved. We'll move on now to reports, resolutions, and communications. Any reports from staff this evening?
First, we would like to welcome our newest member, Ellen Coe Rodkey. She is filling the Parks Board position for us on the Plan Commission. So welcome, Ellen. Thank you for being here. We are glad to be back to a full board. And I will say I emailed you all the same table that you already got related to the amendments. I went ahead and went through and numbered the PDF pages so that while we're going through tonight, if you want to pop from page to page or one you're especially interested in or something, be a little easier to find them through the references. So that should be in your inboxes in case you need to use that. And I think that's all. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. Any reports or communications from commissioners tonight? All right. Well, then, we are on to our petitions this evening. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Kinsey?
Yes, that is my hand raised. I was just going to, welcome Ellen Rodkey. I'm so glad that you're joining us from Parks, but I also wanted to offer some public thanks. I don't know if we did this, and I couldn't see it in the minutes last time, but I would like to see the minutes reflect our appreciation for Israel Herrera's contributions to the Plan Commission from the Parks Board. I think he really played a very important role, particularly during all of our UDO revisions, and I just want to acknowledge his contributions. I think it's important to have community members who take the work seriously, and I think he really did and raised some really vital questions to make our work go well. So thank you to Israel Herrera for his contributions, and welcome, Ellen.
Yes, Thank you. I think you speak for all of us. Commissioner Burrell? Oh, that's a clapping, not a raised hand. All right. Can't quite keep my emojis straight from this distance. All right. Any other reports or communications from commissioners? All right. Thank you. So we will now move on to petition DP-53-22. Again, this is a request for primary plat approval to allow a two-lot subdivision at 1225 East Maxwell Lane. And I believe we've got case manager Gabriel Holbrow here to present. Take it away, Gabriel.
Yes, let me pull up a little presentation here.
It's going to be a little tough for us to hear you with the mask. If you wouldn't mind just pulling the mic a little closer, I think that would help.
Okay, there we go. I'm Gabriel Holbrow, zoning planner for Planning and Transportation Department. This petition is for primary plat approval to allow us two-lot subdivision in the residential small lot, the R3 zoning district. The property is located at 1225 East Maxwell Lane, so that's the northwest corner of East Maxwell Lane and South Highland Avenue. It's located in the R3 zoning district. Neighboring properties to the north, east, and west are also in R3. Of these, the properties to the north and also the east across Highland are located in the Elm Heights Historic District. Properties to the south across Maxwell Lane are located in R2. The property contains one detached single-family dwelling. Surrounding properties also contain detached single-family dwellings with a small number of vacant lots. So the petitioner is requesting primary plat approval to allow two-lot subdivision of 0.4 acres in the R3 district. They're also requesting a delegation of secondary plat approval to staff. No new public streets are proposed. Essentially, the proposal is a simple idea. It's taking one lot and making it into two. There are a lot of complicated details, but the big picture is just that, one lot into two, with no new roads. One of the complicated details, the Plan Commission previously approved a final, what we now call a secondary plat, for a similar two-lot subdivision of this property in 2001. That was case number DP-0501, but the final plat was never recorded, and the plat has since expired. So we're starting from the beginning again. The petitioner proposes to subdivide the existing property into two lots. Lot 1, there on the left side of the screen. Initially, it'll be vacant, and it'll have frontage on Maxwell Lane. Lot 2 will contain the existing house, and it'll have frontage on both Maxwell and Highland. There are no current plans to develop Lot 1, but in the future, it could be developed with any use that's allowed under the UDO in the R3 district or whatever district it ends up being sometime in the future. The proposed subdivision is following infill subdivision standards. Let's see. Which includes, so in the R3 district, the minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet. Minimum lot width is 50 feet. Both the lots meet that. Lot 1 is proposed at over 6,000 square feet. Proposed lot 2 is over 9,000 square feet. And the with frontage, the lot 2 has frontage on both Maxwell and Highland. Lot 1 has 60 feet of lot width along Maxwell Lane. The setbacks for, you'll notice here, setbacks for the existing structure. The existing structure has two lawful non-conforming setbacks that will not be affected by the proposed subdivision. First of all, on the north side, it's located less than the required minimum of 6 feet from the property line. Second, the house is located farther than the required build-to line of 15 feet. If a new house were built here, it would have to be at 15 feet from Maxwell Lane, and it's farther than that. But there's no requirement in the UDO that these existing lawful nonconformities be resolved in order for the subdivision plat to be approved. The existing house will have compliant side setback from the proposed new side property line separating lots 1 and 2. So that is a requirement of the subdivision, that you're not creating new nonconformities of that type, and this is meeting that. The proposed subdivision includes new dedicated right-of-way. The transportation plan calls for a 60-foot wide right-of-way for both Maxwell Lane and Highland Avenue. The proposed plat dedicates an additional 9.81 feet along Maxwell Lane, they're at the bottom, and an additional 10.5 feet along Highland Avenue, bringing those sides of the street from the center line to the new proposed right-of-way up to the proposed widths in the transportation plan. You also notice that there's extra right-of-way at the corner to make that curve. So the UDO requires that property line corners be rounded with arcs with radii not less than 25 feet. Here we have a radius of 25 feet. Doesn't change anything on the ground yet, but that is a dedication to the city for extra right-of-way in case that's useful for sight lines or transportation or whatever's necessary as required by the UDO. One thing to pay attention to with the right-of-way dedication, you can see here some of the house stretches, or sorry, this is a view of what you might call the front of the house. This is a photo from 2014, so it's a little old, but I believe the features are still there. This is the house from Highland Avenue, and you can see between the house and the sidewalk there, we have a fence, a deck, brick walls, a brick patio. Some of those will become, they are in the area that's proposed to be right-of-way dedication. After dedication, if the city accepts the dedicated right-of-way, then the Board of Public Works would have the authority to allow or prohibit any of these features. This doesn't necessarily affect the subdivision proposal. It's not a requirement that they be taken out or a requirement that they be recognized ahead of time, but it's an issue that exists that the petitioner is aware of. The right-of-way dedication will also create a new nonconformity, because by moving the front property line along the edge of right-of-way along Highland Avenue, the existing house will be, in some places, a little bit more than the 15-foot build-to line, in some places a little bit less. So because it's right-of-way dedication as opposed to building something that's non-conforming, there's no requirement in the UDO that this non-conformity be removed in order for the subdivision plat to be approved. So we talked about that. The other thing, another detail here is pedestrian facilities and the tree plots. So it's sort of highlighted along here, the area where there are sidewalks now. So Maxwell Lane and Highland Avenue are classified as neighborhood residential streets by the transportation plan. The design parameters in Table 5 of the transportation plan call for a 6-foot sidewalk and a 5-foot wide greenscape between the sidewalk and the curb on this type of street. However, the plan also authorizes the Director of Planning and Transportation to approve different dimensions based on specific site conditions. In this instance, the specific site conditions include that there's already an existing 4.5-foot sidewalk without separation from the curb, not only adjacent to this property, but around the entire circumference of this block. Moving and widening the sidewalks only adjacent to the proposed subdivision would bring this portion of the sidewalk out of alignment with the contiguous network indefinitely, reducing the connectivity of the pedestrian network. A newly dedicated public right-of-way will provide a greenscape of approximately 10 feet wide at the back of the sidewalk. So the transportation plan calls for the curb, the tree plot, then the sidewalk. That's preferred for a lot of different reasons. But in this situation, what's proposed, we will still have a tree plot. It'll just be curb, sidewalk, then tree plot. So the existing sidewalk, the proposal is to keep the existing layout that has been approved by Planning and Transportation as authorized by the transportation plan. But in any case, the existing sidewalk has to meet standards for adequacy, including compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and also the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, PROAG. So we don't have full information on the current accessibility of the sidewalk, but the current assumption is that all the panels are fine and in adequate condition, but that there are two features which don't quite meet existing PROAG guidelines. One of them is it doesn't show up very well here, but there's a drive cut. This is on Maxwell Lane on what will be Lot 1, the vacant lot. There's an existing drive cut there, which appears to not meet current PROAG. That would have to be replaced as part of final plat. Similarly, the curb ramp at the corner, this is a picture, this is in 2014, so it's not totally up to date, but my understanding is that it's still the current condition there. That would have to be upgraded as well if that turns out to not be compliant with PROAG. The overall layout of the sidewalk is being proposed as consistent with the transportation plan. There's also the issue of street trees. So again, we don't have a new tree plot between a new sidewalk and the curb, but we do have a new tree plot created in right-of-way because of the right-of-way dedication on the back side of the sidewalk. And there are a lot of trees in there, as you could see in the previous pictures. The petitioner submitted a markup of the plat showing the location of existing trees, which will become street trees. There's a lot of trees in there. Some of them are, none of them are invasive, so none of them are required to be taken out, but some of them don't meet the qualifications for being large canopy trees, so they don't count toward the street tree requirement. Of the 16 or so trees that were marked there, we have a honey locust, elm tree, sycamore, and then 2 white oaks, including one on the corner, which all meet the standards in the current UDO as large canopy street trees, so those count toward requirements. The requirement is to have 4 along Maxwell Lane, at least 4 along Maxwell Lane, and at least 3 along Highland based on the width of those frontages. So we've got 4 in Maxwell and 1 on the corner that can count for Highland. So we need 2 more street trees on Highland. Staff recommends a condition for secondary plat to provide those trees. There are all the usual criteria for approving anything, including compliance with the UDO, as presented in the written staff report. The proposed finding is that it meets all those criteria. I just want to highlight the criteria applicable to primary plats in particular. The proposed finding is that the plat is consistent with the comprehensive plan, allowing new infill development in a centrally located neighborhood that, quote, respects the prevailing character and development pattern of adjacent properties, which is a quote from the comprehensive plan. There are no expected adverse impacts as a result of this plat. There are no known natural, scenic, or historic features of significant importance on this site. Also, there are no floodplains or drainage issues identified. The existing road system, public services, public facilities, including existing pedestrian facilities, are adequate to support all the allowed uses, and no phasing of the plat is expected. The conclusion in the staff report is that the proposed subdivision meets the intent of the UDO, and with recommended conditions will fully comply with all standards in the UDO. The small 2-lot subdivision is appropriate infill development within an already developed neighborhood. The remaining issues to resolve are of a technical nature and do not affect the overall intent or design of the subdivision. So the department finds that the request to delegate secondary plat approval to staff is appropriate. Just want to highlight the recommended conditions. So staff recommends that the Plan Commission adopt the proposed findings and approve the primary plat with 4 recommended conditions. The first condition is that secondary plat approval be delegated to staff. The second has to do with the accessibility of the sidewalks, as we mentioned. Prior to secondary plat approval, the petitioner shall submit an assessment of the condition of the existing sidewalk, including compliance with the ADA and PROAG, for review and approval by both Planning and Transportation and Engineering, and then reconstruction or correction of any non-compliant features identified in the assessment shall be required. The third recommendation has to do with the street trees. Essentially, that the secondary plat will show street trees enough to meet all the requirements, that is 4 on Maxwell and 3 on Highland. The fourth recommended condition has to do with a zoning commitment for the sidewalk. This is similar to the type of zoning commitment that gets attached to a sidewalk variance called a determinate sidewalk variance, thank you, which is saying that they don't have to build a sidewalk now, but they might have to in the future. So we recommend a condition saying that in the event that adjacent sidewalks are ever rebuilt with a new alignment according to the preferred dimensions from the transportation plan, that at that time the owners of these lots would be required to reconstruct new sidewalks in the right-of-way to match the new alignment. So those are the it's a recommendation for approval with those conditions. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Gabriel. Is there a representative of the petitioner who would like to add anything to the presentation tonight?
Yeah, I want to alert, we have Mr. Lee here in the room, and then also Mr. Graham was on the Zoom a minute ago. I don't know if you plan on having him speak or not, but there's two people, one in the room and one on Zoom.
Well, if you're in the room, feel free to just approach the podium and state your name for the record.
My name is Bob Lee, and with my wife, Marianne, that's Shami. We would appreciate your pronunciation. But one thing I realized, 2001 was a simpler time. You know, that's when we originally had the property subdivided and went through the planning commission. But now things are a little more complicated. This is actually a fairly simple subdivision, I think, if you look at it. No. The only thing is there's some technical issues. And as Gabriel, he speaks to it much better than I will. And then Doug will get on, I think, if he comes back. And, you know, he'll just tell you, we've been working with them on the sidewalk issues, the technical things to resolve and fix, you know, before it can be legally recorded. Those were the only 2 waivers I was asking for, was to, you know, send the secondary plat issues to the planning department, and then the sidewalk waiver to change that, because it's not consistent, you know, to move the sidewalk with anything else in the neighborhood. And if you go on Highland to the north, the sidewalk just dead ends. You know, it's not into, you know, at the neighbor's property. It's just not very conducive to putting a sidewalk in. But and then I found, especially now, with, just kind of climate crisis we're in, the idea of cutting down trees just seemed like a bad idea. I think we need to maintain any tree canopy we can in the city, if we can. But, so we're working with the planning commission to try and, with the planning department to try and work out any technical issues. And like I say, I think it's fairly simple. So I would hope it goes that way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Was there someone else who was going to comment online?
Yeah, he's there. Doug, you should be able to speak.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
I don't have anything to add. I think Gabriel made a good presentation. I have looked at the sidewalk. There may be some things to note to bring it up to city code, but I didn't have time to prepare an official report. But that's about all I have to add.
Do you mind stating your name for the record?
Oh, I'm Doug Grant. I'm with Byron Fanning and working for Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Okay, are there any questions from commissioners for staff or for the petitioner? Commissioner Smith, go ahead.
Thank you. And I appreciate the presentation and Mr. Lee talking about it. So the two questions I have, I guess first one maybe is for Mr. Lee is, are there concerns in the neighborhood about, whatever is going on with the property? It talks about that there's, the petitioner should make good faith effort to address concerns that adjoining property owners in immediate neighborhood if, such a meeting is required. Are there concerns that are going on that we need to understand?
Not that I'm completely aware of. I think there's a kind of an ugly buzzword out there now that's been created, in the last few years, duplex. And so I've had some people ask me, and I said that's really not what this is about anyway. So, and when people have come to me and talked to me, they seem very satisfied with what's going on. But, just the people I've talked to anyway.
Right, and it says in the material that there's really no plans to develop it at this point.
No. Possible compost bin is as far as I've gone in my thinking. As you can see from the subdivision in 2001, I may move in fairly deliberate fashion with these things.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I appreciate it. And I have one more question. Can
Go
I
ahead.
ask it, President
Yeah,
Weasley?
go ahead.
Ms. Scanlon, what uses are allowed in the R3 district for such a property?
Yeah, so primarily single-family. There are, single-family is by right. Duplex would be allowed by conditional use permit with the conditions that go along with duplex, including a buffer around any other duplexes permitted by conditional use. Also, conditional uses have to have a public hearing. We've gone through, I believe, 3 so far in the past 12 months. So duplex would be allowed as a conditional use. It would require a public hearing. Neighbors would get notice. There'd be an opportunity to present about it. There are a few other by right uses allowed in the district that are generally compatible with single family, urban agriculture, then also accessory uses like home daycare, artist studio. There's also, you can get a conditional use for a home occupation, but it's generally the purpose of the R3 district is for the residential use, primarily single family, with the conditional for duplex. So other commercial uses, industrial uses, gas stations or things like that just simply are not allowed.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Kinsey.
Yeah, I have a question about condition number 2, and specifically, if the sidewalk is found to be not in compliance with ADA or the PRAWAG, they have to fix it, or it has to be fixed now, and I presume that's before the plat is recorded. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're correct that it has to be fixed now. Technically speaking, the plat is recorded first, and then they have up to, I'm forgetting the number of years, but possibly 1 year, when they record it, they put a performance bond, and then they have a certain amount of time to finish it. If they don't, then the city calls the bond to finish the work themselves. So technically it happens after recording of the plat, but essentially it happens simultaneously. And so it happens now. It doesn't happen some vague date sometime in the future.
Great. So in some ways, would it be fair to describe that as a public benefit, that because the property is being platted and now this needs to be at least reviewed and then corrected if it's found to be non-compliant, that having that curb or that rounded corner that looks like it is not necessarily ADA compliant. I'm not a judge of that, so I don't know. But if it's demonstrated to not be compliant, and then where I saw the driveway cut, that those would actually be improvements to the sidewalk for accessibility. Is that a correct way to frame it?
Yes, I'm not sure if public benefit has a technical definition anywhere or in any, tradition or whatever, but just speaking generally, yes, that's a benefit that for the public that is as a condition of subdivision approval. The UDO is asking for certain things to be brought up to what the city expects, and that's an example of one of those things that we hope will benefit the public.
Great. And I had one more question, but I don't want to hog the time, so may I go? Is that okay? Or
Please continue, yeah.
it should be a quick one. I also wondered about the framing of the phrase "in the event that," which I think is that's a great phrasing, because we don't know when there might be some other work to be done around and the need to align those sidewalks. And I wonder if the staff have any idea when that might be taken up, if at all. I mean, is this a really kind of far distant future? Or is it possible that there might be some work that would need to be done, or that would be considered that is part of that "in the event of" phrasing? And that's my last question.
Yeah, we looked into it. There are absolutely no plans of any stage of development or growth to redo the sidewalks here, either publicly or privately, at this time. However, as the UDO or more specifically the transportation plan makes clear, it's a desire of the city to upgrade these sidewalks. So there's a desire in an adopted transportation plan, but there's no plans on the books to implement it at any point right now. So the condition might be that condition for a very long time, but staff felt that it was important to have it in there to not lose that opportunity if it ever came along in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner St. John.
Thank you. Just a quick question. So the driveway cut looks like it will go with Lot 1, and Lot 2 will not have a driveway cut. Is that right?
That's correct. At a future time, the property owner of Lot 2 could do a right-of-way use permit application to modify the right-of-way features and install a new drive cut. Up to 1 would be compliant with the UDO as well, at 18 feet wide. So that could be done in the future. If that's something that you want to be thinking about, so in the future, it would be perfectly allowable under the code for Lot 2 to have one 18-foot wide driveway off of either Maxwell or Highland. But that's not part of the proposal at this time.
Thank you. Commissioner Seabour, go ahead.
Thank you. I think I've got a few quick questions. One, I'm not sure if it's for the petitioner or for staff, but one of the requests is for the secondary plat to be delegated to staff, and I hear that as a request, and also just noting that we've had a series of similar conditions on others, similar petitions in the past, and was just kind of curious to understand that, knowing we have a plat committee as well that is mostly made up of staff, but just kind of curious to understand the nature of the request and just to explore that topic, I guess, a little bit more.
Which topic? The
delegation of plats to staff as opposed to the committee that's established to review plats.
You mean, asking about the possibility of delegation of secondary plat to the plat committee as
Correct.
opposed to just staff. Maybe I'll just start talking, and Jackie will correct me when I say something wrong. I was not aware that that was an option, to delegate to the plat committee.
Sure. Okay, Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager. I think in the interest of timing for the petitioners in cases such as this or other ones, so it's kind of twofold. Ones that are very simple, that we feel like were fleshed out enough at this stage, we recommend those go to staff. Or this, though it has been more complicated, we have delved into it so deeply at this level that, again, in the interest of time for the petitioner, instead of having to file and then go to plat committee, the next month or 4 or 5 weeks later, they can submit a drawing to staff and have that report just written in in a couple weeks. So just taking some time off. But we are open to, if the Plan Commission would prefer to send those things to plat committee, that would be fine as well with us.
I guess a question to the petitioner. I think the staff report covered it, but with the right-of-way dedication, like a note that there's quite a bit of stuff in that area that's going to be dedicated as right-of-way, like just making sure that you're aware of that and that some of it could be required to be removed by the Board of Public Works in the future, or I can't speak on behalf, just kind of curious to make sure you're understanding of the situation.
Yes, I'm very aware of that.
Okay.
I just had to make my wife aware with some of the things she's planted, I guess.
Okay, thank you. That was all. I just wanted to verify that. And then the last question I have is about the fourth condition, basically that if the sidewalk is to be reconstructed at some point in the future, the property owners would be responsible to construct it. I'm just knowing how projects work. I think it might be more easily managed if essentially the city managed a longer sidewalk project and that the property owners could contribute financially towards that proportion of the sidewalk.
As staff, I would heartily encourage a friendly amendment to that. I was assuming that that is the most likely scenario, and was trying to come up with wording that would encompass that as well, but maybe different wording would be better. I think, if the city comes through with a project, it would make sense for those property owners to contribute their fair share financially instead of actually doing the work themselves. Even if another private developer had some reason why they were improving the whole street, it might make sense to still do it as one project and just have these owners contribute financially. So if you have ideas about a better way to phrase that in the condition, I at least would welcome that very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions from commissioners? All right, seeing none, we will then go to public comment on DP 53-22. Is there anyone from the public who would like to make comment? There are literally no one here in the
No one,
in the
no
chambers.
members of the
Anyone
public.
online would like
Nope.
to make comment? If you are on the online meeting and would like to make comment, just click on that reactions button and then click on the raise hand button, or send a chat message to Ms. Scanlon and we'll get you recognized to make comment.
Nope.
Last call for public comment. All right, we are then back to the commission for any final comments or a motion. Gabriel, would you mind bringing the staff recommendation back up onto the screen?
So I apologize that it's split onto two different slides, but I can bounce back and forth.
Sure, I don't think the motion needs to include word for word all of the
Before we have a
Conditions here?
motion, do we want to clarify whether or not, can you go to number 4 so Mr. Seaboard can see that and we can maybe? So I think maybe we could suggest for the last portion of number 4, unless you wrote something, Andrew, already, which currently reads, "At that time, the property owners of the subdivided lots shall be required to construct new sidewalks farther from the curb to match the new alignment," maybe changing that to something like, "At that time, the property owners of the subdivided lots shall be financially responsible for new sidewalks constructed farther from the curb to match the new alignment?" Or something, shall be financially responsible for the portion of the projects adjacent to their right, to their property. That last one will probably be better.
I like that second one.
Okay. So, after the last comma, "At that time, the property owners of the subdivided lots shall be financially responsible for the portions of the projects, of the sidewalk project adjacent to their properties."
All right. So if we're going to have a motion here, you could make the motion to just include the new language as just stated by staff for the 4th condition.
I
Commissioner St. John, go ahead.
move that we adopt the proposed findings and approve the primary plat of DP-53-22, plat 2022-11-0001, with the 4 conditions as presented in the packet, as well as the additional sentence that was added at the end of condition 4.
I'll just ask, can we say with the amended condition 4? Is that all right,
Yes.
Ms. St. John? Thank you.
With the amended condition 4.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second that.
All right, any final comments before we call the roll?
Something.
Commissioner Burrell.
Yes, so is he going to be responsible for the improvements on the adjacent property or in his own lot 1 and lot 2? On the number 4,
So I think I can answer that by reading back the proposed language. The final sentence would be, where does it start? In the event that new sidewalks adjacent to the west along the north side of Maxwell Lane or the north along the west side of Highland Avenue or ever constructed according to the dimensional standards in the transportation plan, comma, this part's new. At that time, the property owners of the subdivided lots shall be financially responsible for the portion of the sidewalk project adjacent to their properties.
Jackie and Gabriel, I'm sorry, is it possible, I know it's time consuming, to put that on the screen?
Yes.
For clarity, for everyone's clarity?
But I think that makes it clear that if the newly created lot had new ownership in the meantime, the responsibility could be passed to that new owner, because it references property owners. Maybe we should say the respective property owners.
Sure.
To make sure that refers to them separately. Because even today, you have multiple owners of the subdivided lots, right?
And what was the,
Perspective right here. And then each of their properties.
Excellent. Commissioner St. John, does your motion stand with the new condition as appears on the screen?
Yes, that's the amended fourth condition.
Are you okay with that, Mr. Rooker?
Yes, I think that reflects what was said out loud. I think that'll help everybody. Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion, and I believe we had a second. Your second still stands. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any final comments? All right, can we please call the roll on the motion?
Okay, Seabour,
Yes.
Cockrum,
yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Rodkey. Yes. Smith,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
and Burrell.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries, and the petition is approved. Thank you for your time. We will now move on to our series of UDO amendments. We have 4 of them, and I believe, Jackie, are you going to be presenting these? Are you presenting them one at a time, or?
I believe
All
we're doing
together?
them one each, one at a time.
All right, so we'll
What we've
begin
done
with
in the past.
ZO 04-23.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. So as Mr. Whistler said, we have a series of 4 text amendment ordinances to go through tonight. And the first is ZO 0423. Just as a reminder, we have been coming forward once a calendar year with text amendments that we have worked on throughout the previous year to address issues that have been raised or items that have come from Plan Commission, or we've occasionally done larger policy items, but typically kind of addressing smaller issues and clean up. So the last became effective in June of '22. You actually saw a more recent ordinance change when we did the TRO at the end of last year, earlier this year. But this is part of our regular maintenance ordinance. So the first one is the technical corrections ordinance. The petition contains a number of corrections or clarifications. One of those things is basically just running a spell check, and we had some misspelled words from the TRO process that we needed to take care of, and some extra spaces or lacking parentheses from other updates we've done where the update had made something a tiny bit off. We had just regular misspelled words or a couple of misplaced references, a formatting error related to vision clearance triangle we've discussed before. And so in total, there are 19 listed, some appearing multiple times in code. And so these are for clarity. So I will just briefly show you the red line. Oh, shoot, I maybe gave you the wrong page numbers here. Hold on just a second. The first one is basically in the table of of zoning districts, downtown character overlay appears twice. We have a number of spelling errors, some table labels that were incorrect in chapter 4. And then again, as I mentioned, the vision clear and triangle issue, that is in here a number of times, I think 4 or 5 times. A reference that was left over from the old code, getting rid of a duplicate definition, and then just a couple of clarifying clarifying words in some of the definitions at the end, including deleting a second duplicate. So this one is one of our simpler ordinances, and so they really were all corrections. So if everyone's had a chance to take a look, I could answer any questions, or if you have ones you want to specifically see, let me know.
All right, are there any questions for Ms. Scanlon? All right, seeing none, is there any public comment on ZO 04-23? Again, if you'd like to make comment, if you're joining us online, just click the reactions button and click the raise hand button, or just send a chat message.
It is only commissioners and Katz and myself online currently.
All right.
I don't know if you can, yeah.
All right, seeing none, then we are back to the commission for any final comment or for a motion. Commissioner St. John?
Yes. I move approval of ZO-04-23 technical amendments.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Jackie, would you please call the roll?
Cockrum,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Rodkey,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
and Seabour.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we are on then to ZO-05-23.
Okay, this one is slightly more complicated. So this is chapters 3, 5, and 7, and these are going to be more substantive. Some of them are going to be more substantive. So I'm going to go ahead and read the brief synopsis that was in the packet for those listening. This petition contains amendments for Chapter 3 related to use-specific standards for uses allowed in the code. They're related to various items, including alteration to the required non-residential space in the downtown zoning district, which is something that was requested by a couple of the Plan Commission members at a public meeting and discussed. Other amendments relate to the changes to rules for vehicle fuel stations, requiring that they be more compatible with the structure, the building on their site, as well as the canopies. Outdoor storage and self-storage facility design changes, clarification, and finally clarification for the process for ADU paperwork when you are not actually doing any changes to the inside of your building but want to establish an official ADU. The only Chapter 5 change was clarifying how we regulate existing structures involved on land that is being subdivided, or, as we call it, being part of a lot line adjustment, which is exempt from subdivision, because the code hadn't been very clear about how to deal with existing development on those lots in the past. And then we have Chapter 7 amendments that that alter a few of our definitions. So these I am going to show you just a second, because I think these were a couple of the ones that were only in the table and not in the red line. So I want to make sure you understand what they are, because they are part of the proposal, and when they go to council, it will be in there. So the first one here is for the definition of basement. So one of the things that we have to use, hold on, if I can zoom in there. So in this definition of basement, it lists that a basement shall be counted as a story for determining building setbacks if the front exterior of the basement front exterior wall of the basement facing a street is not completely below grade. We are also adding there and number of stories, because now in the code, as you know, since the update of 2020, we regulate stories as well as height. And so whether or not the basement is counted as a story is something that's impactful, and the definition hadn't spoken to that before because we were only regulating height. So what will happen here is that after this phrase, building setbacks, it will say and number of stories. So that is one addition. We are also proposing to change, just a second, to amend the definition of footprint. Again, footprint is typically thought of obviously as the enclosed space of a building, but we are clarifying that for those buildings that don't have walls, that we still can have a defined footprint if necessary. So that's part of the change for that word there. So that one's not too complicated. We are proposing to change the definition of a landscape area because we have come across a couple of times in enforcement that sometimes a developer will want to, for example, plant some sort of like growing moss or something on the top of a wall and have that be counting toward their required green space, open space, and that's not really the purpose of the open green space. So we would like to add a clarifying sentence to this existing definition, which would stay the same, and the sentence would say, areas on the top of buildings, walls, and planters or other similar areas do not count as landscape area for the purpose of minimum landscape area requirements. We already do that in practice, but just to clarify for them, we've had that question as well for green roofs, whether or not that should count, and it does not correspond with our definition of impervious surface, which excludes buildings. So just to clarify there. And then also adding, oops, I skipped one, sorry. Clarifying the definition of grade. Again, trying to get at, sometimes, we don't have a very flat city in a lot of places, so being able to define these terms for average finished grade is something that we talk about in the code, and it doesn't have a good definition. So here we have finished grade, and we would be adding average finished grade, which is the midpoint between the highest exposed finished grade and lowest exposed finished grade as measured at a minimum of 4 feet from the exterior of the building facade. So that's a pretty typical definition, so that you're measuring that area not from, someone just piling dirt up against the building, but from slightly further out on site for a more realistic view. So we only had a handful of our own definition changes. The last one that we had is in the definition of change in use. And that is clarifying here, you can see in the parenthetical, that if you are doing an individual tenant space update in a basically what you would think of as like a strip mall, that you don't have to, that's not technically a change in use. It doesn't require full site compliance. Again, we already do that in practice, but it isn't very clear in the definition, so we wanted to clarify that. There are quite a few more updates in Chapter 7. I think in total, there are, 52 in Chapter 7. The large majority, all of the rest of them, are updates that we received from the state to update our floodplain development section and definitions. So I can go through those if you have specific questions, but otherwise they're basically just regulatory that we have been told that we need to do by the end of the year, which I believe helps the community be able to be eligible for floodplain insurance. So in this one, I think the biggest, probably the most difficult one to discuss or for you all to think about would be the first one of changing the non-residential ground floor standards. We obviously have had some discussions at the Board of Zoning Appeals and then again here at Plan Commission about what that number should be. When we talked about it as a group and kind of came to a consensus, what we have offered basically is, you can see it here, is changing instead of just a straight 50% of the ground floor area being required to be non-residential on the streets on this map, it's or 5,000 square feet, whichever is less. And then a clarification of what types of areas count as non-residential, because we have heard some questions about that in the past. There, that's better. We don't feel comfortable going completely to zero because the comprehensive plan is pretty clear that it does not want residential on the outward-facing ground floor in these areas. So we think that there may be room for that discussion, but it would need to be a comprehensive plan update first. And so that may be something that we end up tackling again. But at this stage, without doing that update first, I think we felt comfortable going down to this. It doesn't solve everyone's problems, but does open it up a little bit more for some other options. And I would say of 0523, that's probably the one that will garner the most discussion. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Randolph.
Well, it's more of a comment. I could form it into a question, but I guess I understand why it's here. It's kind of the nomenclature or the terminology being used as 1% chance to include the 100-year floodplain. I guess now these are conversations I've had at the county and kind of across the state with other agencies, but I think Christopher Burke being the largest notable person I've listened to, where we're occurring the same type of flooding, but it's outside of the 100-year flood. And I think also it gives like this other notion that this only occurs every 100 years. And we're seeing these areas being more developed, which cause more restrictions in our drainage ways. So we do see some of the same impacts that are outside of the 100-year that were typically kind of defined by that 1%. So adding the 100-year, I think, has a misconception of how frequent this may occur. It's more of it happens more frequently than that, and I'm sure we all could probably point to a flood over the last 2 or 3 years. So I understand why it's there. It's been used and known as the 100-year floodplain, but I don't know how much we would want to add that back into our ordinance because, again, I feel like it's somewhat misleading because we see that type of storm more frequently. And I guess if you wanted to address that, since you are bringing these revisions to us today.
Sure. So I think I could be wrong, so you can point me to exactly what you're talking about. But first of all, okay, so these definitions come from the state and they're mandatory. We have to use them. But I do think that they have made an attempt to address that issue in a number of these definitions, like for area of special flood hazard or flood hazard area. Why those are two definitions, I don't know. Special flood hazard area, they are calling it the 1% as opposed to calling it the 100-year. So I think they are trying to get away from that and leaving it in, like, for example, in the base flood, because for what you've said, that people know that term and know what it means. But yeah, I agree that has always been unclear what that means, and that the more we can the more we can point out that it's a 1% or greater chance of being flooded in any given year, just as an education piece, that is helpful. I don't know that we can do that in these definitions, but maybe the next time we come around, we could talk about, I would have to get with Mike, and I'm not sure what we can add to what they propose.
Okay, if this is going in line with the state, but I thought the state kind of addressed this where they're trying to refer to it as the 1% as well, so.
Yes, I think they are, but this is the language that we got from them this year. I don't know if you'll recall, but we already did this a couple of years ago. We completely updated the floodplain section, and then they changed what they wanted it to be, and this is the most current.
Perfect. And there, you did put the best available data in here too, that I guess, and I'll just make a note of it, that there is some legislation moving around about removing the best available floodplain data. So I'll just, I guess, take time to mention that.
All right.
I think Jillian has her hand up.
Yes, Commissioner Kinsey.
Yes, I wonder if perhaps, Jackie, you could comment on the non-residential change that's being proposed to address the Plan Commission's questions or concerns about this. And I wonder if there were other options that you just didn't feel comfortable considering at this point. And then I wonder if any of the members of the Plan Commission also have a comment about this as well.
Sure. So as I said, I think we ultimately didn't feel comfortable basically completely removing it. So some of the other options would be change the streets on the map, but then it was kind of, we didn't feel that it would be best to just kind of remove 5 or 6 of the streets. We just didn't know that that would be as impactful as actually changing the regulation, even though this change isn't a large one. I think we were also trying to stay in line with the comprehensive plan, which does want non-residential on these street-facing buildings. So trying to find kind of a line there in between wanting to be cognizant that maybe the market is changing and that that's maybe not quite realistic anymore, but realizing that by following the guiding document, we didn't feel we could completely change it. And we are open to continuing to discussing that and potentially doing a comprehensive plan update. But at this time, this is kind of where we landed. We also talked about doing, instead of a square footage, potentially like we have in other areas, the first 20 feet or something along those lines. But based on the sizes and configuration of most of the lots that are affected, the kind of more historic, thinner, longer lots, we felt like this regulation ended up making the most sense of the 3 or 4 that I discussed. But yeah, we're happy for any input and of course, amendment if you all need to.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody, I'm sure somebody else has a comment about this.
All right. Commissioner Burrell.
So 5,000 square feet, it's a lot. So it almost seems like we're not changing anything. I guess I would be, can I ask a question to Chris Corcoran? Because he works with commercial spaces. He can tell me what would be an average commercial space square footage.
Sure, Commissioner Cochran, if you'd like to address that.
So 5,000 square feet does still feel like quite a bit of space. I know of several spaces. I mean, there's not a lot of 5,000 square feet spaces in our downtown, and I happen to have one on the market that's been on the market for quite a while, and it's just there's not the demand for it right now. One of the things that's nice, well, I guess the first question is, what made you come up with 5,000? And first off, thank you for addressing this, but where did we come up with 5,000 in that number?
Sure. I think I'll let Director Robinson address that. Thanks.
Scott Robinson, Director of Planning and Transportation. That number is a really hard number to come up with. Nobody's suggested a number. Comprehensive plan is 100%. We peeled it back to 50%, and we continue to hear that that's too much. Yet I've yet to hear anybody suggest what is the right size. The map, staff could propose portions of the map to change. Some locations work great maybe than others. So again, we don't have any feedback from how to amend the map. In looking at the traditional lots and the size and the downtown, looking at some of the smaller lots, many of them will probably hit right around that 5,000 or less square footage. So it's still going to be less than 50%. We're peeling it back, but it's not significant change. So yes, you're right. It's not going to change much, but it will depend on which lot you're talking about. So I think the challenge gets into those narrow street frontages that are very deep. And honestly, I tried to come up with a proportion, and it's really hard to come up with the right number. If you look at what we've done in other areas about the setback, the 20 feet, that's getting pretty low, especially on our higher priority corridors like Kirkwood, 4th Street, where you're looking at probably 2,000 feet or less, which I think that's a pretty significant policy change, and I'm just not comfortable bringing that forward at this time, but I'm happy to entertain a proposal. The Plan Commission, you know, it's up to you to make that decision. We'll forward that on to City Council. I know it's something that when we went through the update of the comprehensive, or the UDO, you know, one of the things that we kept hearing about is the requirement for so much first floor non-residential is too much, and so we continually peel that back. I'm concerned, however, if we peel it too far back, we're not going to get anything, and that's a very fine balance of trying to figure that out, because there are areas that are certainly viable, and we still continue to see interest of non-residential uses in those areas. It's a very long-winded answer for, it's the best we could do to come up with a way to revisit that number and still peeling it back without kind of tipping that balance of being in conflict with the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, well, it is a challenge, and one of the things I've noticed in a very good market, people take larger spaces. In a tough market, people want to have a smaller space. So being able to give a developer that flexibility to shift with the market will hopefully not lead to any, you know, they can fill the space a lot faster in a changing market. One of the thoughts is, and you know, this could always be for discussion, is you know, just the linear feet of the building. Could there be a formula similar to what we do with the signage and so much square footage that you could add to it? I mean, obviously, I'd love to have a discussion about it to try to find something that gave flexibility to a developer or a building owner to where they could shift with the market as the market shifts.
Yeah, again, I tried to come up with a proportion looking at different lots. It's hard to come up with a value that strikes that balance of just right. I think another thing that you know is somewhat of a urban legend is, you know, oh, if we can easily convert these spaces. Once the space is built to be either residential or non-residential, it's very expensive to convert it later in the future. And I think that's, you know, me looking around the country at places they're doing and hearing what developers say, once you build it to spec out to what that space is, it's very hard to come back and retrofit that space. And what we want on our first floors is that taller first floor story, so it gives that feel of eyes on the street, presence, building forward, so we have an active streetscape. Residential uses tend not to like that, you know, higher first floor. HVAC, building codes, and all those things kind of make it more challenging to convert that. So as we can continue to change that number, it gets harder to see how those spaces will change over time. So yeah, I agree the flexibility with markets and trends that we're seeing is a way that we can help factor into that, but I think the expectation is, could this space be converted in the future to residential or non-residential? I think that's a little bit more challenging, and how to come up with that.
Mm-hmm. being that I represent many of these retail spaces, those are conversations that are being had when we battle tested the market to try to find somebody. You know, we're turning to that as a possible option. Obviously, the cost is high, but they don't really want to go to that cost, but they don't want the space to be vacant anymore either. So I have another question. So not including the residential access areas, so the amenities, I noticed that some developers have chosen to put fitness centers on the main level. Is that what we're trying to address?
Yeah, again, I think the idea is really trying to capture what is part of the intent of the non-residential component on the first floor versus putting uses that are maybe not necessarily associated with that non-residential component. They're really like, it's a duck, you know, that walks like a duck. Like it's purely for the intent of the residential uses. We shouldn't be counting that towards that. Now, there's some gray area about how we do that, and I think, again, that's what the language we proposed is to help clarify counting some of those other spaces. If it's purely part of the non-residential use, then you can count that, but it might not be the, it might be the kitchen or whatever that's in the back or mechanical and those kind of square footage requirements.
Last question I have is, so obviously this is better than what we have, just reducing it. If we feel we need to adjust it in the future, what is our process? How would we go about that?
Well, ideally, in the perfect world, we do need to look at our comprehensive plan and kind of base our policy guidance on that. And as Ms. Scanlon noted, it says 100%, the first floor should be non-residential. So we'll have to take a look at that. We can go back and strategically look at the map and help clarify which areas might have more flexibility to do that. Outside of the map of the downtown, we've certainly incorporated a lower standard than those areas highlighted in the downtown. So that's one thing that we can do. I know it's time to go through that process. Comprehensive plan was adopted in 2018. It's hard to believe that I'm even mentioning the fact that maybe we should be looking at updating that, but these are documents that we need to keep relevant and fresh. And there's some other things that with the UDO, there'll be a new administration next year, and I'm sure they'll have their administrative priorities, and that's something to be mindful which direction we'll need to be. So I don't want to preemptively do something that might not be consistent with what the next administration sees as a priority for both update of the comprehensive plan and or the UDO.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Burrell, did that answer your question? Do you have another question?
Yes. So I do understand the frontage of the building being commercial, completely commercial. And I understand what we're talking about, lobbies or garage being equivalent to that. So my question is, so when you talk 50%, let's say the footprint is 10,000, you're going pretty deep into the footprint. That's, that's what I was talking about. Not that I'm not saying to take away the commercial spaces in the front, but to make it more flexible for each building to make use of the first floor in another way. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. So when I think of 50%, I think it's a little high, but I understand. I understand where everybody is. I was hoping we'll be with a lesser percentage at this point. So.
Thank you. I think when we get back to comments, we can consider an amendment on that if you have a specific idea. I have a specific idea that I'll share, but maybe not during the question period. We'll come back to that. Are there any other questions for staff? All right. Seeing none, is there any public comment? Just come on up to the podium, state your name. You'll have up to 5 minutes to make comment. And just a reminder, if you're online and would like to make comment, just find that reactions button and click raise hand, or send a chat message to Jackie Scanlon, and we will recognize you to make your comment online.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is Dave Harstad. I am a commercial real estate broker in Bloomington and a property owner downtown. I do care deeply about having an activated street front in the downtown zone, and so I do think that having commercial frontages on street is an important policy objective for the city. Having said that, I still think it's a lot of square footage. And so in my head, I break it down mathematically, and you think about an original plat lot being 132 by 66. And so if that square footage is 8720 and you divide that by half, that's still a pretty large square footage. And so where my head goes, I don't have this fully sussed out in my head, but I think choosing a depth of street frontage might be a way to go. And so I'm not sure of that depth. You look at shopping centers, even suburban shopping centers, the trend is away from 80-foot depths and even 60-foot depths. And you see shopping centers in suburban areas that are 40 and 50-foot depths. And so where my head goes, and again, you guys can figure out the details, but I think having an active street front with a shallower depth might be a solution. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Last call for public comment. All right. Seeing none, we are back to the commission for any additional questions or comments. Commissioner Smith.
I just want to ask the staff, is this the period where the adjustments to the UDO was undertaken, and is this the result of those discussions?
I'm so sorry, I don't think I understand your question.
My question relates to, there was discussion of altering, modifying the UDO related to affordable housing issues. And I had asked some questions, and there was going to be some undertaking of a change of UDO standards, perhaps related to incentivizing affordable housing even further. And it was said to me that it was in the springtime and somewhere around March. And, well, it's March, and so I'm trying to figure out, is this when the UDO is generally modified in relation to what we found out over the last
Yes.
year or so?
Yes.
I have a second question.
Please continue.
So has there been discussions on modifying the UDO to help incentivize more affordable housing in larger apartment complexes?
Well, that isn't in this ordinance. Chapter 4 is where incentives lived, and that's in the next one we'll talk about. I don't know that there is much in there deepening those incentives. There is some clarification to how they work to make them be easier, but yeah, we will discuss that when we get to 00623, but not in this one, because this one doesn't cover that topic.
Okay. I'll probably have
No,
another
that's fine.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for responding to that.
Go ahead.
I want to kind of close my comment from earlier and just applaud the administration with being proactive to put in the best available data for floodplain, even if it is stricken from state law. Local ordinances will still trump that, so I just wanted to close that loop. I didn't finish my part of my statement there.
All right, thank you. Commissioner St. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to clarify this, the non-residential ground floor standard. So, Mr. Robinson, I think you said the comprehensive plan is 100%, and the UDO has 50%. And the point is to protect that ground floor street environment, if you will, looking at the map. I mean, it's completely, Kirkwood, Courthouse Square, all the things where we expect to see non-residential. So if that's the case, it seems like the 50% is not actually doing that. It's because someone could divide the 50% vertically, if you will, from the front to the back. And now half of the street front is non-residential and half the street front is residential. I believe that's the case. So the 50% idea doesn't actually protect that street-facing environment. And so I had the exact same thought. It seems that it should reflect that the street-facing frontage, square footage, whatever that is non-residential, 100%. And then some portion behind it. And I guess that's not a question. I'm not phrasing it as a question, but it sort of kind of is. Is that even an option if one were to propose that kind of change?
Yes. So I would say in practice, we haven't seen, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't seen someone who has street frontage and then is wanting to use only a portion of it and going all the way back for their 50%. That just, the way that the buildings in these areas are, doesn't work that way, really. In a new build, that could probably be maybe more possible. But yes, there could definitely be clarifying language to say whatever portion you all end up wanting to require has to be, the entirety of the frontage has to be included in that portion. Yep.
I've actually took a stab at an amendment here.
Oh, good.
On
Yeah.
this, and Jackie, I just emailed it to you, and I'll just read it out loud if that's.
And can I just reply to her comment?
Yeah,
real
yeah,
quick?
please.
So I agree with you that, yeah, probably no one's going to divide it that way, but we're sort of in the technical rule book of the board game, and so it feels like everything needs to be very precise. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, so what I propose is that we replace the current language, or the current proposed language that says a minimum of 50% of the total ground floor area or 5,000 square feet, whichever is less, of a building located along each street frontage, et cetera, et cetera. We replace that with the ground floor area extending a minimum of 15 feet from the building facade on each street frontage identified by a black line in Figure 47, and so on. That ensures that at least you've got usable space. It's not just a, false use, not just a storefront window. You actually have, usable space there. It extends from the facade, and we could add the word from the entirety of the entire length of the facade, if that makes it even clearer.
Did you say, just to clarify, 15, 1, 5?
I said 1.5, yes. I think that's kind of minimum, usable space, if that's, a little shop or office. I don't think that's a magic number, but that's the number that I think, in my mind, if anything less than that is not real space, it's just sort of for show.
So your proposal have a minimum square footage?
No, just 15 feet from the entirety of the facade.
So this gets hard in some of, this is fine, I know we have to talk about all this. This gets hard, like, for example, at Suite 118 on the east side of the square, it's one building, and then, like, the way that it's broken up, you know, it's on the first floor, it's commercial. They have offices there, I think, like a rental for somebody else. But then there's a stairwell that leads to the rest. But I mean, on their frontage, it's just one thing. You can't tell it's different. But the, you know, right 8 feet or whatever is not commercial. It leads to the upstairs or whatever. So just when we're thinking about, so I think the percentage, I don't know. That would be something, you know, something that we talk about. Because when you do a percentage, then you can say, like, okay, that part's not included, but it goes back a tiny bit more or whatever. Where if we're saying the entirety of this rectangle up against the road has to be commercial, that isn't going to be necessarily possible for all of our existing, the way that some of these historic, so there are other historic buildings like that on the square where it's mostly commercial, but then your entrance to your residential is also there on the first floor. So I'm not sure how to.
I'm not sure I see the issue there. I mean, a stairway is a non-residential use.
Well, yeah, that would be something that you would need to discuss. So currently, the way that we talk about that, if it's a stairway that's only serving the residents, then it's a residential use.
And also, so we would just need to remove stairwells or
Yeah.
from that section.
Or you could put some.
Or could it
go
be
ahead.
a percentage of the building facade? So extending a minimum of 15 feet, stretching 90% of the building facade, or a minimum of 36 and, 3 feet, because that's what a doorway would be.
Yeah,
if
I think
it's-
my concern with that is when you have a skinny building, then, yeah, maybe, I don't know, is 10% even enough to have a stairway, right?
Right,
So-
yeah, so you'd have to have that minimum width of a,
This could be something that's a little too difficult to parse on the fly here tonight.
Well, the
Well,
other thing to
especially
think
like a
about
building
is
lot,
that the rest of downtown, outside of the areas identified as, highly commercial, pedestrian commercial, is 20. So we would be saying here, less commercial in these areas than, on 11th Street or whatever, somewhere else in the MD, if you went 15. Sorry, go ahead, Flavia.
Yeah, so can you clarify that? You said 20, what do you mean, 20%, 20 feet?
20 feet.
20 feet from the front facade, they have to have commercial space outside of the downtown overlay?
Yeah, it's not commercial, but non-residential, which typically ends up, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, so how is that definition worded
I
then?
empathize with the problem here, with the director and, of Plan Commission, and also with the Planning Commission. This is not a simple solution because there are so many different types of buildings. And sometimes if you have a large apartment complex, you might need a foyer that will require, 15 feet of frontage or more. So it's not a cookie cutter. It's very difficult to set it up. What I am talking about it, and I agree, and I want to make sure that you guys understand that I agree that having the eyes on the street and the higher frontage, that is all, that looks great, and it produces, vitality and vibrancy downtown. I understand all that. I think we need to really put our heads together and see what works best, and that's what I'm trying to figure it out. Because if you ask 50%, and you have a small footprint, you know, it can create a lot of issues. But if the building is skinny, it's another situation. And if the building, if you have to put an entrance for residential, that's another issue. If you have to put a parking garage, that's another issue. And that's, I understand the complications and how difficult it is to get this done, but I think it's something that needs to be discussed with people that know businesses and know what the businesses need. I'm not talking about getting away without putting residential on the first floor. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But what is feasible? That's what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Any other, I'll hold off on making a motion on that at this time then.
I do have a comment.
Go ahead, Commissioner Cochran.
So I like this because you know, I support the comprehensive plan, and I think proposing that your proposal would still be in line with the comprehensive plan, but it's going to build flexibility for that developer, whether it's 15 feet or 20 feet or, you know, whatever that number is. But then the developer could then choose to go bigger if they wanted to, if they wanted to provide more square footage. But at least it would give them the flexibility to adapt to the market and still have the street frontage, which I think we all would like to have, you know, the walkability of our downtown. So I would support an amendment like that. So.
Go ahead, Commissioner St. John.
Just wonder, given how complex this is, how feasible it is to, if we so chose to not consider this one particular amendment tonight, and you all, as the experts, go back and figure it out, which I know sounds pretty complicated, but I don't know that we're all going to, I mean, I appreciate you putting in words what I was trying to say too, but I'm not sure, listening now to Ms. Scanlon and all the nuances of these properties, to be able to put something together for us and come back is something you all would have an appetite to do as staff.
Well, a couple things. If you direct us to do it, we will try. I do think our base starting point is that I think we understand what the comprehensive plan wants to do, kind of like in a macro, but it specifically says just none, no, you know, 100% non-residential. So it feels to us like when we're making arguments to developers or whoever about following the guiding documents, that we don't then want to not be to kind of reasoning ourselves out of following them ourselves. We do think that you should probably do a comprehensive plan amendment because, you know, like you're saying, we've heard from a lot of very educated realtors, some here in this room, some, you know, that we've talked to otherwise, that maybe those, we need to have a larger conversation with downtown users and downtown owners and what really could fix, what's wrong with it now, first of all, and what could actually fix that problem. I think this amendment moves closer to, I mean, you know, it moves the needle a little bit, not as much as some people would like. So I don't think including it would do much harm. Even the caveat at the end, that's how we already treat the difference between residential and non-residential. This would just be clarifying so that someone kind of knew what they were getting into when they read it a little more clearly. But yeah, I do think we recognize this isn't, you know, as Ms. Burrell said, you know, it's not really kind of getting to maybe what we see now as a new reality, but in the 2018 number is just high, and that's what we kind of have to go from at this point. I don't know if that was helpful. That was probably not helpful.
I think
May
that.
I have one?
Go ahead, Commissioner Burrell.
I do agree with Commissioner St. John that the intent is, if it is the intent to have 100% commercial in the ground floor, you know, not necessarily needs to take the whole first floor or, you know, space or 50%. And maybe we continue this discussion, but I would be I would love to hear from owners. You can drive downtown and you can see a lot of empty spaces that are not being rented. Why aren't they being rented? Is it too expensive? Is it too small? Is it too big? What is going on? Because the goal is to make our city vibrant and to make our city walkable and to make our city, full of vitality. So what can we do to change that? And that's what I'd be interested in knowing. And I know that is not easy, Jackie. But we need to start somehow, so.
Yeah, I think this is, it's already, the UDO is already, with what we've got on the table here tonight, inconsistent with what's in the comprehensive plan. So I don't think that's a reason we shouldn't get this right. I'm happy to, support an amendment to the comprehensive plan as well, if that's what we want to do to make them consistent. But I don't think we should pass the 5,000 square foot language if there's consensus here in this board that that's not what we want. We don't want to give people whiplash by passing this along and then next month coming back with another change. I think we should get this right before we move it along. That's my personal opinion. If we don't think we can find the right language tonight, then I would suggest we continue this till our next meeting in April and try to find the right language in the meantime. Commissioner Kinsey, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I was probably going to go in the same vein that you were just going, and I'm only going to ask if that's a real disruption to what the staff has planned, if there is a acknowledgement here that we may not be solving anything or may not really be addressing anything, and if there's a way that if we tried something slightly different that might use some of the language either that's feet from the facade or something else, that we could get it right before moving it forward. If that seems like a pretty low if that doesn't seem like it's even possible, then I might be inclined to go ahead with this just to signal that this could spark some further consideration for a change to the comprehensive plan. But I think I'm more in line with where Commissioner Whistler is suggesting, is that this isn't quite right, and we might be better served by not moving something along that's not quite right.
Any other comments? Commissioner Cochran, go ahead.
So I agree with Commissioner Whistler. The challenge I see is there's projects being designed right now and developed right now under this plan, and even if we decide to pass the 5,000 square feet with the thought of doing something different, it would to have someone have to hit this requirement to build their building. Well, they may or may not decide to move forward. So I would like to try our best to get it right, if we can this evening or whenever. But I would really like to try to get it right.
Go ahead.
I don't really have a position on kind of a lot of the discussion, except for we're talking a lot about street frontage, and I just want to bring up the nuance that the alleyways are really important too for access, and if we're thinking about making, the back part of buildings residential, are we going to run into an issue with, common space for the commercial use for loading and unloading? So just wanted to throw one other nuance in there for consideration to really try to get this right. But defer to planning here with incremental steps so you can kind of assess how things are moving forward and what's the right next step. So that's my only comment.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? A motion, perhaps?
So we can motion approval, I'm asking, of this ZO-05-23 with striking the first amendment and asking staff to go back and rewrite it. Is that possible, Mr. Rooker?
So
Sure.
you have to decide what you want to do. You can either not vote on it right now, which I think has been suggested as a package, this entire zoning ordinance. If you want to forward everything except the change to the downtown first floor non-residential space, what I would recommend is amending that out and considering that at a separate time. So that would mean all of the other changes proposed by staff would go forward with that 90-day clock to go to City Council, but that portion would be put off and delayed and would likely have to be part of some sort of separate zoning ordinance amendment. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So sort of two options there, if that made sense.
Can I ask a follow-up question, just procedurally, logistically? If we were to do that, if we were to move everything else along tonight, is this going to get on the council agenda before we have our next meeting?
I'll jump in here. We don't know. The council has 90 days to take it up. So in our experience, probably not, but it's possible that they could take up this zoning ordinance before you would come forward with that proposal. Scott may have more.
So theoretically, just the question is, if we move everything else along tonight, we come back and we just consider a separate ordinance just on this particular clause at our April meeting, can we still get it all in front of council as one package?
Planning and Transportation Director, great question, Commissioner Whistler. I think if the commission were to decide to move forward with the ordinances tonight, it's likely that they will be heard at one package with council. And if you chose to bring forward, pulled out the first floor as a separate amendment, I can't tell you what that would look like with the council schedule. They may be able to fold it into their scheduling process, because they do have that 90-day window. But, this would be kicked down, 30 days down the clock. Their scheduling, typically how it goes is they'll have their summer recess, and then when they come back from their summer recess, they have a very short period where they kind of take up their usual business before they. I see Councilmember Smith nodding his head. Then we get into budget season, which gets very complicated, getting other legislation through council. So they're very mindful of trying to take care of business before they go on recess. So I think we're okay. This is March, April, but we start getting into we start really compressing their schedule moving forward. So I think what I would recommend is let's keep our business moving forward. If you're not comfortable with something, let's pull it out, spend time and work on it and get it right before we bring it to council. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you. And just to clarify, since we've already passed one of these tonight, that 90-day clock's already ticking on that first one that we already passed, correct?
That's correct. Yes, you forwarded one zoning ordinance with a recommendation for approval already
Okay.
this evening.
So I would suggest that we entertain an amendment to just remove this particular change, this proposed change of Chapter 3, Citation 20.03.010E1, and then we vote on the remainder of these changes and moving them along.
Is that a motion?
I can make it a motion. if
It
that's-
sounded like a motion.
I
was just-
move that we amend this ordinance to remove the changes proposed to Chapter 3, Citation 03.010E1.
Good. I was second. If you weren't going to do it, I was. So good. I'll be the second.
All
can-
right.
I'm
Any-
sorry, I'm going to jump in. I just want to make sure everybody understands what they're voting on. Are you voting to amend the proposed zoning ordinance, or are you moving to both amend the zoning ordinance and forward with a positive
No,
recommendation?
we're voting to amend the, the proposed changes here to remove that change.
Just voting on the amendment.
Just voting on the amendment to remove, we're amending the amendment to remove that particular change.
Thank you, President
Yep.
Whistler.
Any questions or comments on that? Okay.
I just have a quick comment. I
Oh,
think
I'm
that
sorry.
makes the most sense to do. I'll just say this quickly as I think because the rest of the amendments in this are meritorious and don't deserve to be held back because of this one. And I suspect that this could be a controversial issue or something that the council might want to entertain separately. And I would hate to see the rest of the amendments that seem less controversial be held up because of this. So I think this might be a wise procedural move anyway.
All right. Thank you. All right, any other questions, comments before we call the roll on the amendment to the amendment? All right, Jackie, would you please?
So the amendment, sorry. So the amendment is to remove this from the packet.
Correct. So we would be moving along, this packet of
With
changes
everything else,
without the
yeah.
change to 20.03.010E1.
Thank you.
Okay, Jackie, would you please call the roll on that?
Yes, so
Amendment
this
to
is a vote on whether or not to remove the amendment related to 20.03.010E1.
Correct.
Related to non-residential ground floor standards from the rest of ZO 0523. Cochran?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Rodkey? Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Ballard?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
Seaboard?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so that amendment passes, and we, of course, I think, along with that, would like to strongly encourage staff to work with us to come up with some new language for our April meeting. And I'm happy to volunteer to participate in some offline discussions about that if we need to. So we are then back to ZO05-23. Any other final comments or questions on that? Any other changes?
I would also happy to volunteer to be a part of that discussion.
Great, thank you.
All right, do we have a motion on ZO05-23?
I have one procedural thing to add. I'm so sorry, I forgot to say at the beginning. These ordinances are not, they're subject to 2 hearings.
Yep.
So in this motion, we'll need waiver of second hearing, and then we'll go back at
Go
the
back,
end to
yep.
fix the first one. Sorry about that.
Yep. So, yes, the motion should include a waiver of the second hearing. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of ZO-05-23 and waiver of second hearing, and just noting for the public that we have made an amendment to it as it appears in the packet.
So the motion is to approve ZO-05-23 as amended and to waive the second hearing.
I'll second.
All right, Jackie, would you please call the roll?
Kinsey?
Yes.
Rodkey?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Ballard?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
Seaboard?
Yes.
And Cochran.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can we now have a motion? Well, I'll just go ahead and make it. I move that we waive the second hearing on ZO-04-23.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Okay, Jackie, would you please call the roll on waiver of the second hearing on ZO-04-23?
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Seaboard,
Yes.
Cockrum,
Yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
and Rodkey.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we are now on to ZO-06-23.
Okay, just a sec. All right. Okay. So this is 006-23, and this is for Chapter 4. So another one of our usually more meaty chapter discussions. And let me get us to the right page here. Okay, so by way of synopsis, because this is development standards and incentives for all districts, the amendments kind of run the gamut. I will just briefly go over them as I go through them. The one that we will maybe want to talk about the most, I think that we have heard a little bit of feedback on, is that we updated the maximum vehicle parking allowance table. We added maximums where there was currently no limit. So this is something we had heard from some council members being concerned about why would we be including uses that had no limit on parking when that's something we talk about quite a bit, especially with prioritizing green space and open space, making sure those things can work together. So we went through, and I believe it was 68 updates, which is quite a number of uses to have absolutely no limit on the number of parking. So the maximums that we have, so we're proposing maximums for those. They were based on the characteristics of the use, as well as looking at typical allowances in other codes or other places and needs of other existing facilities. A couple of the uses in the table we upped, so that was increasing parking space allowance for both the use restaurant and fitness center large, based on a number of recent variances that we've had in the last year or so. So we'll get to that shortly, but that is probably the one that you will maybe find some interest from the public in. There are 54 total amendments identified, including that we are entirely replacing the floodplain section. Again, I'm happy to look at that if you have questions, but otherwise, basically just syncing with the state. So the first update we have for this ordinance is that clarifying that that I-69 is not a front yard when we're talking about setbacks. That is the way that we operate, but just putting that directly into the code for clarification purposes as properties along the highway will go to develop. And then you can see here in table 4-6, clarifying these are some setback exceptions. We are adding some of the other two primarily single-family zoning districts to a front entry exception that was put in either last year or the year before, that was written by a local architect, so that there could be extra space for front entry there. And then you can see also in the table clarifying language for additions to existing structures that are located in required setbacks that applies to first floor additions. So the language right now is that if you're doing a first floor addition, you can use an existing setback on a non-conforming lot, and we're clarifying that you can build up without having to get a variance. We have had a couple of those recently. We have a number of landscaping changes. The first one is kind of small but important, in that we are putting in code that you cannot use plastic netting or mesh as either erosion control or landscape control on the property. Obviously, that plastic doesn't biodegrade, and we have been encouraging landscapers now for some time, so all of the local landscapers are familiar with this, to use a biodegradable product, and we've had people have to take this out when their plans indicated that they weren't going to use it. So putting that in code so it can be clear up front that is no longer allowed. The next is requiring alley access. So alley access, if you have an improved alley, is already required in the R3 and R4. So we are adding the other primarily single-family districts as well as our less intense multifamily residential and the downtown zoning district. So again, if you have an improved alley and you are doing a development, the vehicular access needs to be off of the alley. Yeah, that's all. Sorry, I thought I had something to add, but I don't. Again, as I said before, we completely replaced the floodplain section. So you'll see in the red line, some of it we were able to kind of piece in, and then there's whole sections that are gone and replaced at the end, again, to sync with the state. We do have a regulation related to conditional use in the floodplain that is more than what is required by the state. But otherwise, we are allowed to do that, and otherwise it should be the same. For parking, for maximum vehicle parking for multifamily, that was one that we called out as separate because the way that maximum parking was written is that it was based on minimum parking, but there is no minimum parking. So we just put in some language to clarify if you had minimum parking, that number, that it would be 125% of that number. So kind of just clarifying something that was not written quite well previously. Okay, so you can see here on this page, this section here related to group care home, nursing and convalescent, and opioid rehab home. Those do have a change, so I'm going to show them to you now. They didn't make it over in the copying pasting that I did because the formatting of these tables is a lot. So those will be fixed in the version that goes to council, and this is what we are proposing. So it's 2.5 spaces per 1,000 for the group care home and facility, and then for nursing convalescent, 1 space per 6 infirm or nursing home bed, and plus 1 space per 3 rooming units, and then aligning the opioid rehab home with some of our other 2.5 space per 1,000 uses, such as supportive housing you can see down here. So those 4 were not shown as changed in the table that you received. Again, I'll just kind of briefly go through these. I'm not going to read every single one, but I'm happy to go back to talk about the ones that you'd like to. We used, for some of the kind of less typical ones, like park or something, we used real life examples and tried to figure out what a still generous but reasonable cap would be. I think the main concern we heard from council was no cap. So some of these are still quite large. They're not something, it's not realistic that we're going to get some of these very many of these uses, but we did feel that it was appropriate to put a cap on them. And then for some of the uses, for example, like police, fire, or rescue station, making an allowance for the fact that some of that job requires a vehicle, so that they're going to need a little more space, likely than a typical office situation would. So again, we can go back through these if you have particular questions, and we have some examples that we could share as well. So as I said before, increasing for fitness center large, that's something we've been hearing from the community for a while, as well as for restaurant. Okay. On to the next thing here. This is related to the affordable and senior housing incentives. So the way that it was written indicated that you would have to meet both of these requirements to have the reduction for affordable and senior housing, but we think the initial intent was for them to be separate, that you were meeting one or the other. So clarifying that and making that process slightly easier if someone wanted to utilize that. Okay, so this section is related to, again, alley access. It's just referenced more than once in code, so this is the second location where that is located. And then the language removal is something that we have a hard time with sometimes when there is development for multifamily, that this 20 feet by 40 feet has been too restrictive and doesn't quite make sense, so we're proposing to take that out. Okay, we worked with and heard from the local architectural community about some requested changes, and so we were able to put some of those in. For example, clarifying what types of metal can be used. This is in the primarily mixed-use districts. And then for exterior facades, trying to clarify how to read that language or how to apply that language to a building. So breaking down the requirements into modules that we think wasn't quite clear before. So requiring that each module be looked at separately and that they each meet the 3 architectural requirements, and then adjusting those requirements again based on the feedback that we received from the public, from the local architects, I should say. And we did something similar here for primary pedestrian entry, made a number of clarifications or changes based on what the local architect's feedback was about what kind of made more sense, better ways to describe or better things to include than what was previously there. So we thought some of these changes would be quite helpful and are proposing them here. And then we are also proposing changes in the residential, so that would be primarily for multifamily, again with metal, and again with the primary pedestrian entry and exterior facade with requirements. And so we can go back to that if you need to. As I said before, we have quite a few landscaping changes, some more substantive than others. We worked with other departments, including Parks and City of Bloomington Utilities, to work on separation of street trees from utility lines. That's something we go around and around about, and engineering as well. And we came to a conclusion that we think works for everyone, so that large canopy trees shall be planted at least 10 feet from public sanitary sewer, water service lines, and natural gas lines. The difference there from current language is adding public, and then also these caveats. Medium and small trees shall be planted at least 5 feet from public sanitary sewer, water service lines, and natural gas lines, except that those trees planted less than 5 feet from public sanitary sewer, water service lines, and natural gas lines may be approved by the director. And obviously, the director would consult with the relevant parties as well. They just didn't feel that they needed to be listed here. So basically, this is a problem downtown, right? So where the utilities are is where they are, and the code requires that any street tree be 10 feet from them. And so quite a number of our existing tree plots would not be usable if we were following that requirement. So putting in this kind of tiered way so that in a new situation, you're doing 10 feet. If 10 feet can't be done, you can use a smaller tree because they're less impactful on the utilities. And if that can't be done, then there can be a discussion with Parks and Engineering and CBU about doing something even less. Parks is doing a large project for their bicentennial tree project, and the way that the regulations were written and have been for a long time would just not allow a large majority of the trees that they need to replace. So some language change, and then just some clarification here again at the bottom, where there are utility conflicts, that we are officially engaging the urban forester. That's something that we already do, but working with Parks and wanting to include that, again, just for clarity for anyone using the UDO, that's kind of the way to go. So we took out a reference to distribution. We heard from the senior zoning planner that was no longer necessary based on some of the other requirements in code. And then we added these 2 references, one to green infrastructure, basically indicating that any green infrastructure facility would be required to use native seeds or plugs, and then installation prior to occupancy, that all landscaping basically be required before you can have occupancy. That, again, is something we already do, but thought having it clarified in code would be helpful. And then finally, I think on this page, species identification. This is basically for enforcement abilities so that we can know what's out there, requiring that be done, and then just a name change here for prohibited plant species. and changing the maximum percentage for diversity on properties that require 20 or more trees to 20% instead of 25. So increasing diversity slightly there, which is something that we're kind of always looking to do. And then removing the reference to pollinator habitats, again, a suggestion from the senior environmental planner. And then a number of the rest of these that you see here, I would say the next 10 or 12 or so, these are again, all from the senior environmental planner, and they are kind of changing some of the verbiage, clarifying, for example, that the caliper listed for trees is a minimum, and then we have new tables for all of our allowed plantings. So that's street trees, interior tree species, a table that we're now just calling permitted shrub species, and then permitted herbaceous flowering perennial plant species. So you can see those in the chapter. Basically, they're just completely replaced. So utilizing some of the existing species, but clarifying those that need to be added or removed. And I believe that's based on her consultation not only with the Environmental Commission, but also the urban forester and other park staff. One of those tables is mislabeled in the red line, so that will be fixed to table 17, where it says 15 now. Otherwise, those should be good to go. Let's see. Okay. These are important related to street trees, these next few changes. So basically clarifying that each of these regulations has its own purpose. So this first one is related to number. So the minimum number of required street trees currently now is based on one street tree every 40 feet of frontage. We're increasing the number of trees by reducing that number to every 30 feet, but clarifying here that this sometimes, we have sometimes an issue with this with developers and staff's reading of this, that this is just for numbers. So you start out with the number that's required, and then you move down the line to location and separation, and that while ideally none should be planted more than 30 feet apart, that there are some situations where that is needed and it is allowed. So code was pretty unclear about that previously. And then just putting in some references to the administrative manual, where we will be putting in stabilization and mulching requirements that are recommended by the Tree Commission. Okay, sorry, I know this is a long one. Next, we are heading to the buffer yard table. First here, we added some uses that cannot be in your buffer yards. This is something we have an issue with occasionally. So buildings, parking areas, swimming pools, and drive aisles are not allowed within the area that you're supposed to be using to buffer the uses next door to you, because those are supposed to be filled with vegetation. And then we are changing the table. So the existing table does seem simpler. It's based on use, but it really just is not working for us very well. It's not nuanced enough. So we went back to zoning district, and basically, if the development is in the zoning district that runs down the left side of the table, then you see what the adjacent zoning district is along the top, and that is how you determine what buffer yard to have. We are changing our buffer yards a little bit. We have run into a number of issues on smaller developing sites, which is something that we're encouraging, smaller multifamily development, but the lots are so small that they don't often have room for a full buffer yard and full building setback. So while the code right now has those two things next to each other, we will allow them to be stacked. So you will still have to have the same number of plantings, but we have seen the Board of Zoning Appeals and I believe the hearing officer grant variances for smaller lots. So we are just going ahead and saying that you don't need the extra space for the building setback, that those two things can be considered in the same location. And again, the plantings don't go down, and additionally, the impervious surface coverage doesn't go down either. So still providing green space on the lot. So parking lot landscaping is next. We have a clarification that if you have sidewalk immediately adjacent to your parking spaces, that you can have your required shrubs immediately on the outside of the outside of the sidewalk. That's something that has been unclear and comes up quite a bit. Clarifying that those trees that are within your islands do not count toward other requirements. Again, trying to get as much coverage over the parking lot as makes sense and as possible. We are now to screening. This is something that comes up in the downtown quite a bit, and we are exempting ground-mounted equipment within 10 feet of an approved alley, an improved platted alley, from screening. So the way code is written now, you basically have to screen your, your Duke box that you're getting on the back of your property, even if there is no other property besides the alley immediately adjacent. So we think that this is still appropriate and they will not be visible from the main thoroughfares. On to signage. Right now, all public signs are exempt from having to receive a sign permit. We are proposing that City of Bloomington public signs be exempt from the regulations as well, so that it's kind of unclear, for example, where they can be located or size requirements. I think the way that this code used to be administered was that they were just exempt, period. But the technical language says that they're just exempt from a permit. So we are adding that they should be exempt from the regulations. Here you have some language not changing the content of the language, but related to student housing or dormitory projects, and what incentives they are eligible for. Not changing the content again, but just trying to make it easier to read. I'm almost done. I think I have like 7 left. Hang in there. We've made a couple of proposals to changes for drive-through uses. Again, as most of you know, we can't regulate content of signs, so we have to write them for uses if we want them to be different from other sign regulations. So these sign regulations are written for uses that utilize drive-throughs. What we are trying to write in here is those electronic reader board signs you see in the drive-through that tells you what you've ordered, either as a portion of the large sign or the one that's right next to you at the window. Currently, they've just become kind of ubiquitous, and we've seen some variance requests for that. We don't really have any way to approve that in that way easily. So we kind of tried to write them in here in a limited way so that they would be optional for people to be able to use those. We've found that obviously they're all over town and that they're not causing issues. I think, let's see. And then we changed some signage regulations for multifamily dwelling uses. There is a difference between, there's a difference in scale of what you're allowed to do. 14 units or less, 15 units or more. So trying to kind of make that simpler and have it apply more evenly across the use. So we replaced the language for multifamily in our 2 residential multifamily districts with the language that was already in the mixed-use districts, so applying to multifamily in the same way across those districts. Oops. For multi-tenant center, indicating that the wall signage requirements are for tenants as well as uses, just to make that a little bit clearer. And then we have 2 more here, I believe. Adding some language for multi-tenant signage for the mixed-use neighborhood district. Previously, if you were doing any multifamily in that district, no signage was allowed. So adding a limited 120 square foot sign, which is a portion of what would be allowed in a more intense district. And finally, just clarifying that electronic reader boards are also prohibited in the, I believe this is in the MD, yeah, in the MD zoning district for signs. And that's all I have for that one. I'm happy to go back and look at anything that piqued your interest. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jackie. Are there any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Cockrum.
So concerning the parking and the new ratios that you have, where did we come up with the numbers, or just, is it the ratios, industry standards, or on some of those limits that we're proposing?
So from different places, right? Yes, some of them are kind of standard. Some are ones that we've seen work based on ones we've seen that haven't worked, and so we've tweaked those, for example, for some of the more common uses. Some of the ones that didn't have limits were similar to uses that did have limits, so then we just kind of tried to match those. Some of the kind of bigger ones that would maybe be more impactful, we looked up those types of uses in other places. So for example, like jail or stadium, we pulled jails and stadiums across the state and tried to look and see like what our limit would do based on what they're showing. And then also, I'll say that the limits that we're showing are limits for the use, but it's for surface parking, right? So if you're in a district that also allows parking garages, which most of the mixed-use districts do, you could build a parking garage if you're not going to get the number that you need on surface parking. And so for us, as a following kind of policy guidelines, we don't want to encourage surface parking. So we actually think most of these numbers are pretty generous. But if someone thought that they weren't, they could still get the parking if they did structured parking. And so I think that's in line with, encouraging more green and kind of less land for just for cars, basically.
And before, they were just no limits at all, correct?
Correct.
I guess some of my concern with some of the employment uses is, I guess, did they figure in like shift changes and because I like when I go by, Catalent down there, it gets real busy as cars are coming in and out. And
Yeah.
sometimes additional parking helps alleviate some of that pressure.
Sure.
Do you think these numbers are the numbers that you pulled on those?
I do think they're yes, I do think they're generous. I think they might feel worrisome to people because we didn't have them before. But for example, I mean, Catalent is like almost 800,000 square feet. So they could have, if they weren't in a PUD and they were building today, all these ifs, they could have 2,640 parking spaces, surface parking spaces. And so is that something that is that something we want? They could, even under these numbers, I think that they are generous. I think if we are tipping, 3,000 spaces, we may need to be talking about structured parking with them at some point. So for, not them particularly, but for an outfit of that size, I do think that, we think that they are generous, yeah.
Any other questions?
Make one comment. There
Go ahead.
is one typo, if we're looking at typos on, in the parking table, under park spaces is spelled incorrectly.
Oh, great, I'll just fix that right up. Right, Mike, I can just fix that.
On page 232.
Thank you.
And, yeah, under park, says spaces twice.
yep.
The second one
Got
is
it.
incorrect.
Thank you.
Commissioner Seabour?
Detailed question in the minimum plantings for landscape bump outs within parking areas, I believe.
Yes.
Just curious that why trees that are in a parking lot bump out don't count towards overall interior tree plantings on the site?
Yes, I think because the way, or this was why we proposed it, because they're like two separate headings. It's not that the bump out trees are kind of like nested or whatever under the interior trees. So if you have, for example, a site with no parking lot, you know, you're having however many interior trees you have to have based on your open green space. And so then to us, if you're offsetting, if you're taking some of that land away to be parking, then parking lots have their own landscaping requirements, and one of those is island trees. And then you analyze the rest of your open space as your interior space, as you would if the parking lot wasn't there. We have kind of seen over the course, I would say, of at least the last year, numbers that they seem too low when they're saying, oh, well, we're using this for that, and kind of double counting things. And it's not that the sites can't support the number of trees, it's just that they, you know, would prefer to do less. So increasing the tree coverage around, you know, mature tree coverage around the parking lots, I think is something that we want to do from kind of an environmental standpoint.
That's helpful. So just because I always dumb things down. So essentially there isn't a tree per acre calculation. It's based on maybe tree per acre of green space plus tree per.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for explaining.
I have another question.
Commissioner Cochran, go ahead.
Concerning parking. So you have conference centers and convention centers.
Yes.
You know, a lot of times a hotel use will be tied to that. Would that be a separate use and looked at separately on their parking requirements?
Yep, so when we have mixed-use buildings or developments, each use and their square footage is counted and then conglomerate, and then added together. Yep. And I'll say, the convention center one didn't change. So it looks like it changed, but it's not actually, it was just written oddly, so it had a, I'm sorry, I don't remember what page that's on. Am I? It is? Oh, I see it. I'm so sorry. Conference, thank you, or convention center. So 2 spaces per 1,000 square foot of ground floor for surface parking. It already is for surface parking. And then if they wanted to do a structured parking garage, we took out a limit on structured parking garages, just period. And basically, if you're doing a garage, you're just limited by all of the other design standards from your site. You know, lot coverage, those types of things, height. Anything else?
Any other questions? Commissioner Smith?
Okay, now I'm going to cause trouble. So, given that, you know, we have a problem with affordable housing, you know, and the lack of access to a lack of places, we don't have enough supply. People are building places down by Crane and taking away some of our people that live here with their nice salaries. Cook is building something in Owen County. So I know this has been on my mind for at least a year. Have you all looked at different ways to change the affordable housing criteria that's on page 309 to help increase or incentivize, to help so people can, commercial builders to help them make it easier for them, to make it faster, to make it so that we can increase that supply. So I'm wondering, I don't see any changes in that here, and so I'm kind of surprised, actually, and wonder, I mean, I think you guys are all wonderful and smart people and everything, so how is that, how do we square that? Bad question, sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the answers is we did some changes last year, if you'll recall, to the affordable housing incentives. And yeah, so we did some, and we're kind of still in the process of seeing what is going on with those. I can let Scott.
Yeah, forgive me for asking this
you're
question,
fine.
you know, but.
Jackie, are you good? Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Scott Robinson, Planning and Transportation Director. Great question. As you know, we keep trying to sweeten the pot for the incentives. So last year we changed the metrics of the floor plates. If you remember that whole thing, we tried to equalize what we were seeing earlier versions is everybody was doing sustainability and not affordability. So we changed the metrics to make those more of a equal bang for their buck. And then if they do both, they get kind of a bigger bang for their buck. So we're still seeing what we're getting from the development community on that. You also remember if we just brought through the TRO, the overlay for Hopewell, and we did tweak the affordability there, so we added more bang for your buck for affordability, but as you know, Hopewell, we're still putting the infrastructure and plating in there when we hope to have, we have some RFIs, requests for information out to the development community to look at some development proposals. So I think right now we're still waiting to kind of hear response from the development community on if these incentives are right-sized or not. We still are fairly limited on available land in Bloomington, so most of the things we're looking at are redevelopment. And there's some challenges to what developers are looking at their formulas on how they, the development types of buildings they're getting, and we're trying to steer them to smaller, more discrete buildings rather than larger. So that's kind of the balancing act that we're currently in. So no, there is nothing in this current proposal that's changing that formula, but we're still very aware of ways we can help sweeten that pot for affordable housing. I'm hopeful the TRO overlay will have something fairly soon once we get those RFIs back, and hopefully get some success stories with the incentives that we tailored for that part of Bloomington.
Thank you very much. Is there a, when we've tweaked these changes, is there a time frame? You all are the experts at this, and I'm a lay person, and is it that we might see an effect in a year or two, or do you have any feel for that?
It's very dependent on the project and some of the complexity. So one of the projects was a PUD approved up on North Bloomington, up on Arlington, the Atlas. Jackie, what's it called? Atlas on 17th? Yes. In that project, they dedicated land to the city. So we're very close to having that land turned over to the city, and we have 2 housing providers, developers ready to start building some affordable units up there. That was approved, I believe, in 2019. It was pre-UDO when that PUD was approved. So I mean, it takes time depending on the project. Then there's others. The annex that is on 3rd Street, there's affordability there. Those will be online this fall, I believe. They seem to be on schedule with that. And so I believe that project was approved 2020. So
it really does take a while to get
yeah, so it takes a couple of years to see some of these things come to fruition. Habitat, with their Osage Place, that took city, county, help to get that land ready, and they're getting units built down there. And so we're seeing units being built, but again, numbers, we're not seeing a lot happening on a daily basis, but they'll have a lot overall at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, and thanks a lot for explaining it.
Yeah, so I mean, the good news is, there's been a lot approved throughout the community. It's going to take time to start seeing those get put into the system once they're approved and ready to go forward, so.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Okay, any additional questions? None? Okay, we will then go to public comment on ZO-06-23. If you're here in the chambers, just make your way to the podium. State your name for the record. If you're online, find that reaction button at the bottom of your screen and click on the raise hand button. And we'll recognize you when it's your turn to speak. You'll have up to 5 minutes.
All right, thank you so much. Again, my name is Dave Harstad. I am a resident and a downtown property owner and a broker in town, and I'm rising to comment on a couple of things. First, just very briefly, the landscaping requirements, more just a question than anything. I'm just wondering if someone who is compliant under this present code has a change of use or something else that triggers bringing things into compliance. If you planted, 15 ginkgos or non-native pollinator-friendly type plants, if that results in someone having to cut down all 15 trees that they planted and have to replace them with oaks or whatever native plants there are. So I would love to get a response to that. Second, and the main reason I'm here is I want to talk about specifically I want to ask you to withdraw or pull back from consideration this maximum vehicle parking allowance. At the end of the day, this is a really small town. We have this air formality here. I know all of you. You all know each other. When Commissioner Cochran asked, where these things came from, there was, all these issues. But I didn't hear, when it comes to regulating parking at stadiums, that you called IU Athletics and sat down with them and talked through it. I didn't hear, when it comes to having parking into the jail, that you talked to the county about it. And so citizen participation in a small town is very important, and it requires that we sit down with people and talk, probably less in this formal setting than this. I think that many of this, this expansion into this vehicle caps is really, really dangerous. In the downtown area, I sort of get it, right? It's problematic, but particularly in suburban areas with industries, I spent a lot of my time working with manufacturers and distributors and those sorts of uses. You can't just park on street, right? I mean, downtown, if you can't park in your private parking lot, there's a surface parking lot there for you. If you're out in the middle of the county in areas that might be annexed, you've got a real problem. In addition to that, if you've got a 53-foot trailer, it may have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment in it, and it needs to be in a parking spot. And each use is different, and so I think, I understand the sustainability and all that sort of stuff that we all agree on, but the larger issue here for me is that this is going to cause a lot of issues with a lot of people. It is, among others, it'll probably lead to more meetings for you. It'll probably lead to more BZA meetings for variances. And so, what I hear in my practice again and again and again, unfortunately, and I don't mean this to be a personal shot at anyone, but our planning department is very slow in getting things done these days. You talk to people in the real estate business, and things will sit on the desk for a very, very long time. And so anything that leads to more meetings, more delay, even if someone who's not getting a variance, it leads to issues for their delay, in being delayed. So I'm just concerned about anything that slows us down anymore. And then lastly, I think about just some of these specific uses. So the jail, why would the jail have a limitation of 2 spaces per 1,000, but this building here, as we expand it, why would the city get 4 spaces per 1,000 plus unlimited police and fire? There may be a good reason for that, but it seems self-dealing. And anytime a city is, saying to the public that, do as I say and not as I do, that's what causes me to come here and testify. We could go through each one of these parking things one by one and pick them apart. But the larger issue here is that we got to talk to each other, and the city needs to play by the same rules as everybody else. And we just, we need better processes, and we need to think about what policies are we actually trying to advance by putting parking maximums, and are the policies that we're adopting actually advancing that? And are you evaluating that and looking at that and with fact-based research to show that, you know, yes, what we're doing is actually having an impact on climate or whatever. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? All right, seeing none, we are back to the commission for any additional comments. Commissioner Enright Randall.
I just have a procedural question. Depending on the favor of the Plan Commission tonight, are we serving as a recommendation to the Common Council?
Yep.
So if we move this forward, then with no amendments, we would be moving it forward with a positive or a negative recommendation?
Mike?
You can move forward with a positive recommendation, a negative recommendation, or if 5 of you cannot agree on a recommendation, you can move it forward with no recommendation at all.
And then if there was amendments to it, we'd be moving it forward with a positive, negative, or no recommendation as well, correct?
Correct. You can make whatever amendments you like to it before you try to garner 5 votes one way or the other.
And then I guess to wrap up this procedural question, if this is moved to a following meeting or tabled, does it move to the Common Council regardless?
No, it wouldn't move to the Common Council. If you decide to continue your consideration of the amendment, it would not go to Common Council yet, so.
Okay, so there is some measures here where the commission can take consideration on what needs to be done before the Common Council hears it. So I just really wanted to identify the tools in our toolbox when we're looking at something like this, because there are certain things that, you know, I think are going to be problematic. For one, I think accessory dwellings, in some cases, no additional parking is probably needed. In some cases, additional parking probably should be required. Or we're forcing people to park on the streets or in a garage, or, you know, we'll hear public comment that, you know, I'm going to rent to someone with a bicycle. Well, that's good until it's sold, and then maybe someone that drives a car is eventually renting that accessory dwelling. So I do think what we're looking at is probably needed, and maybe addressing a lot of comments of, you know, like, let's put limits on parking spaces. But I agree with our public speaker today that we probably should iron out some of these first before just simply moving it forward.
I do want to just mention, for clarity, there is I believe, a 60-day time period. I don't think we've ever encountered that, so I would want to check to make sure I've got the time period right. But once the commission holds a public hearing, I believe you have 60 days to vote on it before it would be forwarded. So there is a clock out there.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Commissioner St. John.
Yep, thank you. I wanted to follow up on the question from public comment with regard to the trees. I think the question was around someone having a change of use and then having to go in and cut down their non-native trees that were previously there. If you could.
Sure, so not for a change in use, no. You have to bring your property up to current code if you meet certain thresholds, like building a new building or larger changes. Change in use would be limited compliance.
Okay, so you wouldn't have to change the trees?
Correct.
And then, actually, I have 3 questions. In terms of the government, the comment about government parking, is the government service facility, is that considered this building? And that's on the second one down on the table. No, it's not. It's after daycare. It's page 232, the large numbers.
Yeah, I'm just checking the technical definition quickly, sorry. Oops, in the wrong spot. Boop. Sorry, just a sec. Okay, so the technical definition of government service facility is a facility owned, operated, or occupied by any level of government to provide a governmental service, but not including offices for the provision of governmental services or facilities for any government operation separately defined in this UDO. So I think we would call this governmental services.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
so,
yeah, go ahead.
so you're going from no limit on a building like this to limited parking for the city of Bloomington?
Yes.
Okay, just want to clarify. And also, I'm confused by the language that a detached garage has no additional parking. So you can build a detached garage, but you can't have parking. It must be in the garage.
So
Is
this
that right?
I'll address your question, and it also addresses Tron's. Single-family detached and attached units don't have any limit. So doing something accessory to them also doesn't need can have a limit, because your house could have 800 parking spaces. So if you decide to build an ADU and your driveway, you make it, 20 feet longer to accommodate one extra car, you're allowed to do that, that's fine. Or if you build a detached garage, you can have the driveway there as well.
Okay, so you're extending the existing driveway, or you can put in a separate area for
Depending on the shape of your lot, most probably extending yours, but some lots do accommodate too. Would accommodate like a U or something like that.
Okay.
Or past a certain point from the road, you can flag out your driveway and have additional parking.
Okay, but no separate, so when it says no additional parking for an accessory dwelling unit, that means like no separate parking lot for an ADU?
No, it's just number. So
Oh,
as
it's
long as you can
number,
meet the
okay.
design, yeah,
Okay.
it's just number.
So did you go through and just take out every no limit and turn it into a limit?
Yes, that's except for single family, which was debated, but we left it as what it already was. That's what we have said publicly we would be looking at doing and discussed with council, I think, during the TRO process.
Okay, you mean for residential? I mean for all
We
of this.
discussed going through all of the no limits and addressing them and
addressing.
researching them and finding something
Okay.
that's appropriate. And I will say, the point of saying, oh, we want to treat everyone the same. We do. We have however many uses in there already that are limited. Why do these other uses get no limit? There's no logical reason for that. And we have heard from the public. We have had a very robust comprehensive plan conversation, and we have said as a community that we don't want to prioritize parking. And we have put that in many other ways, and in this way, we just didn't do that when we did the full update. And we haven't, and we are responsive, however slowly. Feel free to advocate for us to have more staff. We are responsive. When we've had numerous restaurant variances, so we're going back and asking you to increase that, and we understand that it's low. If it were to come out that one of these, even though we've looked at them, ended up being too low, we would come back and ask you to change it, and we would work with them as we've done the other uses, so that they could, reasonably be able to operate on their properties.
That's a good point. I mean, when you say, why do we limit these others? Like, why is the hospital limited on parking and others have no limit? So that is a good point. Thank you for making that, because there probably is a case to be made for several of these that they should not have been no limit to begin with.
And
because someone else equally is limited, so.
Well, and I'd also like to point out, I think you all know this, but we don't regulate IU trustee-owned property. So asking IU what their thoughts are on a stadium is moot. They can build as many stadiums as they want, and there's nothing we can do about it. We tried to look at other stadiums for the types of private or private partnership stadiums that have been built in communities of our size in this region, and what they did, and made sure that our numbers made sense for them. Are we gonna get, maybe you all know Secret Thing and we're getting some sort of AAA team here or something. If something comes through that isn't gonna work out, we will work with them. But based on what we've seen development in the last 4 years of these types of uses, these numbers are appropriate.
Director Robinson, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just want to help maybe clarify why some of these were changed. Ms. Scanlon did mention that when we brought the TRO overlay through the process, which you first reviewed and recommended a positive recommendation to council, it was during that conversation with our elected officials that they expect us to have maximums in our code, because during that process, the question came up is like, why do some uses don't have parking maximums? So I am honoring their request, saying that we would bring this forward at this time. Now, is it, spot on, right on? I think Ms. Scanlon provided a pretty good context that we have a pretty good educated guess, but if it's wrong, we'll fix it. We've been back every year consistently with text amendments. We're actually considering bringing forward another batch later this year, just depending on, feedback that we hear. So again, if we don't get it right tonight, we can take a similar approach. If you want to pull it out, you can. We can move forward. But I fully expect council will consider an amendment if there are no parking maximums included. That was specifically discussed when we brought that overlay before them.
Thank you. Commissioner Kinsey.
Yes, I probably feel like most of this has already been discussed, but I just want to lift up or invite the staff specifically to respond to the critique about the strategy that was used. And the idea of asking people about what would work. It sounds like a nice, folksy, kind of a community-based strategy. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it sounds like you used a process. And I wonder if you wanted to elaborate on any of that. You indicated that you went to some other places to determine, to other sites and locales to make this determination. Is there anything else that indicates what you did to derive these limits?
Sure, I would just say again, yes, so for example, we looked at other jail facilities that are proposed or have been built around the state or in the region in the last handful of years. We did do that when we had the rezone as well, so we had some of that data from when we did that. Again, looking up, small scale stadiums, looking at Catalent, how much parking do they have? How much parking would they be allowed if we were to have, something of that nature again? So trying to look at the uses that are already regulated in the code, and of those that weren't regulated, were there any that were similar? And so we could use those as a guide. And then those that didn't have, a touch point already in the code, trying to find a real life example if possible, and, seeing how many, if our regulation that we were proposing made sense for what they had on the ground or what they would want to propose.
Thank you. And then the other side of that question was, in what policies are being advanced here? And I think that's a great question. And it sounds to me like there's multiple policies being advanced. One is a response to the council's request for limits and parking concerns, but the other one is not wanting to prioritize parking. And then this fairness aspect that was just raised by Commissioner St. John's question about setting the need to be equal, or at least equitable, about setting some limits for all, because previously some didn't. Are there any other policies that are being advanced?
I would say, and we can call them out for council, but there are numerous policies and goals in the comprehensive plan, related to as I said, not prioritizing parking, but also prioritizing the use of space for something else, for green space or habitable space or people, and not, focusing only, letting the kind of historic planning model of letting the parking dictate what else can go there. So kind of getting away from that, I think. Is something that if you guys choose to move this forward, something that we can include for council, though they asked us to do this, but just for clarification for public purposes of what kind of goals we're trying to meet with that one.
Thank you. I appreciate all that. I think this is an important thing to at least start to make some strides at making more equal. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments or questions for staff? Commissioner St. John.
I'm glad you did this, and I feel badly asking some of these questions because I feel like I'm picking apart someone's really hard work, so it doesn't feel great, but I am going to ask a couple questions, so please bear with me. So a couple of them, what about and I don't even golf, so 2 spaces per golf hole. How'd you do that? That's so 18 holes, 36 people. They have a golf tournament, and it's foursomes on all 18 holes, and there's not going to be enough space.
Yeah, Ryan Roebling, Planning Services Manager. It just matches the existing use golf course. I didn't add a whole lot of logic to that one, not to make myself sound foolish, but I matched the existing use for country club to golf course. And so if that's the one you're asking about.
So you're saying did you say the Bloomington Country Club that's their number?
No, so the country club didn't have a maximum parking number before, but every golf course that wasn't a country club did have a limit of 2 spaces per hole. So I just matched that.
Okay, so like Cascades, you're saying?
They had to meet that 2 space per hole limit. Potentially not at the time, but they would if they came in today.
He's saying, so we had an existing regulation for golf course.
Okay.
And so the first thing we did was look for ones that were similar and match them if we didn't have issues with them historically.
Okay. All right. I don't know if I had another one. I was just kind of curious. There was a community center one I was wondering about that didn't seem like very many, if they had some big community event. And I guess the same with the convention center. Again, that just speaks to surface parking lot usually when you see a convention center, but it's a convention center. I mean, it's a lot of cars.
Yeah,
and
so,
they're from out of town.
We've obviously had a lot of convention center discussion in this community in the last however many years. And I think we fully expect, right, that there will be some sort of structured parking involved or in the area or something, which is just not regulated number-wise. So a supportive structure, plus, if there's a hotel there, that those things will add up.
And I do appreciate the work you've done, too.
No, we appreciate the questions. It's important to figure it out.
And I understand, too, and I understand you're taking direction from the city council, common council, who's going to do what they're going to do, and I don't love surface parking either, but I also do not do anything but drive a car to get to work, and I won't ever ride a bike or walk because I live in a place I can't go in these clothes to work. So I think there is a balance there. So I appreciate what you all are trying to do in response to the council's request. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Cochran.
So, respectfully to the council, for the request, but are you seeing any issues with the way the policy was written before as you present or work with the different companies and the different businesses in town?
Sure, a handful. So you've seen, in the other years we've come forward, we've done one-offs where we had a use. And part of the problem is some of the code is reliant on this number. I'm not going to say this right. Where it's based on whatever the maximum of your parking is, helps us toward other numbers. And when they didn't have it, then we weren't sure what to do. So you've seen one-offs where someone came forward with a development, and that was hindering them being able to easily develop it because they didn't have a number. And we do see I would say we have seen some developments that probably could have gone better if they had had maxes. Because like for limited compliance, for example, you have to remove excess asphalt either if you're over your impervious or if you're over your maximum parking. And so we've had some locations that are quite old, some sort of like a kind of factory storage building with just almost entirely covered in asphalt, but then not been able to have them take any of it up because they didn't have a maximum parking number because their use doesn't have one. So that would help us address that as well, which would go toward kind of the goal of getting more green. And we have had some people willingly kind of work with us on those areas. But if they didn't want to do that, we would, in some cases, not be able to compel them.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? I've got one. On the location of trees relative to utilities, there's the change for the distinction between large trees and small trees. But was there a corresponding change in the limit that says if you are in proximity to utilities, you can have small trees instead of large trees? Or are we just assuming that those kinds of things are going to be handled as exceptions?
So the tier is large, and then there is.
I'm saying in the event that, so there's a change to account for tree plots that are in proximity to utilities.
Correct.
And we're saying that small trees don't have to be 10 feet away, they can only be 5 feet away. But that doesn't necessarily, that one change doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for large trees, right, in a particular project. So is there a corresponding change that allows for small trees instead of large trees?
Yes.
I
So,
just didn't see that.
Sorry, yes, so it's not in the table, but it is in the red line. It's on the, hold on, let me see if this will. Hold on just a second. I think it's on. I think this answers your question, but let me know if it doesn't. On page 276, it says the minimum number of required street trees to be planted shall be one large canopy tree for every 30 feet of property that abuts a public right-of-way. If medium or small trees are allowed, 2 medium or small trees can be substituted for each large canopy tree.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep. Commissioner Burrell.
Going back to the parking, when we are so specific, and I understand all the arguments and everything that has been said, but the more restrictions we put down, the more complicated it gets for new businesses, for us to attract healthy businesses to our area. And cars are not going to go away. I understand, if we want to add public transportation that is affordable for everybody, that would make it easier, but not everybody can walk to work or bike to work. Especially when, because of affordable housing, a lot of our people live in Owen County or Greene County, and they have to drive. So what I'm seeing here, I am in a Board of Zoning Appeals. I'm going to see a lot of businesses come forth with appeals to change and vary the parking standards for their project. And that's a concern to me when we get very specific and make the numbers so tight. I think it would generate more work for the Department of Planning and Transportation, not less work. So anyway, just trying to make sense of this. Appreciate everybody's work. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I would add to that sentiment. I don't think that, I wouldn't characterize the current state of the UDO as prioritizing parking. There are zones where there are no caps, but there are plenty of other limits in terms of green space requirements and impervious surface requirements that most certainly limit the amount of, it's not like you can have unlimited parking, right? There's not a specific limit on the number of spaces, but there are many things in the UDO that limit the amount of parking you can have on any property. So I don't think I wouldn't characterize it as we are prioritizing parking. And it does seem a little bit to me like a solution in search of a problem here. I don't think that at least I'm not aware of very specific problems we've had with, overbuilding of parking. So I guess that's a comment, but maybe I'll phrase this as a question. Are there specific cases where we feel like the limits on impervious surface fall short and have allowed overbuilding of parking?
Yeah, so I think the example I gave is the most common one for us where it would be helpful to have a max, which is a site that already exists and is having to come into limited compliance only, is not over there impervious, but has just tons of asphalt on the site for whatever reason. So sometimes the sites are really big and the green space is kind of in the back and then it's just all asphalt up front, where if we had maximums, then we would potentially get some of what the code is desiring, which is some of that parking near the road to be removed and replaced with green space, which is why the code does either or, impervious or max parking. I think that would be our most common example. I mean, yeah, that's what I would say.
I mean, can you give me a specific example of where
I could look for one.
where that's happened?
I can picture it in my mind. I could draw it for you. Let me see if I can figure out what the address is.
I mean, I'm just trying to think of a particular property where it's been problematic. It's okay if there's nothing
Yeah.
top of mind. I don't want to hold up the proceedings for that.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to try one address, but I don't see that that's accurate. Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, it's up to you guys, obviously. As Scott said, I think if you take it out, they might put it back in and like that's their, then it'll come back to you, then it'll go back to them.
Yeah, I don't think it's something that we can just ignore. I think you're absolutely right. If we just take it out, the council's going to put it right back in. I don't have any doubt about that. But I do feel like, there's enough questions here that maybe it's something we want to take a little more time on and make sure we've got it right, similarly to how we dealt with the previous issue. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you also clarify, what's the history, because we know that, to point out the fairness aspect, right? So some already had limits, some didn't. When did the ones who have them get those? And
That's a good
I'm sure that
question.
wasn't necessarily all at one time, but is there some context there?
I'm trying to look at the old code. I will say, I know I already said this, but some have been added in the last few years as they've come up to us as needing to be added, mostly in the context of the limited compliance situation. Hold on, look at something. Just a second. I just don't remember how it used to be. 25%. I think when we did the update, okay, it's just a second. Okay. In the old code, so I'm talking pre-2019. Let me just check, but it looks like they may have all had one. So I think what happened is that when we worked with our consultant, their model was to have some of them have no limit, and kind of in a, I could be remembering this wrong, so if we talk about this again next month, I'll try to see if the other staff remembers as well. But that was kind of their model, and that they felt that they were changing it to no limit on ones that weren't going to be an issue, basically. We have seen issues on them related to the limited compliance stuff, and so we would basically be putting it back to the way that it used to be.
Thank you. And then I would just make one other comment that there were a couple where we're actually raising the request is to raise the limit, like for restaurants, it said from 10 to up to 15. So just say that if we're going to make a change, we'll lose that for the, that change as well.
So I have a question.
Go ahead.
Procedurally, this would require a second hearing, or we could do a waiver.
Yep.
So we could, if we could make an amendment to remove the parking piece of it and send that separately to a second hearing and move the rest of this forward? Meaning if people aren't ready to vote on the parking piece of this,
Yeah, I think there's two ways you
We
can go
just
about
pull
that,
it
right?
out,
One, we
yeah.
can just pull it out
Yeah.
and move the rest of it along. And then it's incumbent on us to figure out how and when we follow up on the parking piece. Or we could just continue the whole thing to a second hearing and attempt to, make any amendments we want to make between now and that second hearing.
and the second hearing, the purpose of the second hearing is to give us more time if we're not ready.
Sure.
But also to give the public more time?
Yeah.
Okay. Feels a little bit like a significant change to make to the UDO, the parking changes that maybe with only one person here tonight and people in the public not aware that this was being discussed, may warrant a second hearing so that the public can weigh in more. And I totally understand the Common Council is going to do what they want, but that's after this body, and we have to do, in my opinion, what's right for us at the moment, and not in an anticipatory way of what they may or may not do. So, and I think they expect us to, quite frankly. So, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm a little surprised at the lack of public comment on such a substantial package of changes. So I think there is some merit in having another hearing and inviting some more public comment on, not just on the parking issue, but on a number of issues here. But we are rapidly approaching our 9 p.m. deadline, and if we don't take action on this in the next 15 minutes, we're going to be facing another hearing anyway, right? I think we can't introduce another. We can't introduce the next item after 9 p.m. if I'm remembering correctly. Is that right?
Absent a unanimous vote to suspend the rule.
Yeah.
So.
But then you have to come back within a week. It doesn't go to next month. It goes to next week.
unless we were to just continue it till.
Oh, I mean the
month.
next one, if you don't get to if you don't get to the last petition, like we had a couple months ago when we,
Right, so
Yeah.
if we don't take action on this and on the next petition in the next 15 minutes,
you just have to start the next petition.
okay,
And then you have to take action on it by 9:30.
Yes.
So it's confusing.
yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions on Z006-23 substantively? All right. I think we need to get a motion on the table. I think the potential options are a motion to amend this and remove the parking. Another motion would be to simply continue this to a second hearing. Another motion might be to move it along as is. But I'm looking for one of those motions. Commissioner Cochran.
So I'll make a motion to remove the parking and vote on the other items.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna need more.
Is there, so your motion is to amend this to simply remove the changes to the table? I think there's a
Can I ask a
couple of
question?
changes.
So we have a couple things going on with table 4-10. So maybe remove the, remove the proposed amendment related to the roughly 70 uses in table 4-10 and that added new maximums, or that decreased maximums. Well, I don't know, it's up to you guys. I mean, we have one other thing that is in table 4-10, which is related to clarifying the multifamily dwelling maximum. That is like its own separate thing, but I mean, you could just
I
push
think we
them
could
all.
we could just amend it to remove all changes to table
Yep.
4-10, and then we bring both of those back in the next meeting.
And just with some commentary, I agree with Commissioner Burrell that it's going to, people will go and ask for the Board of Zoning Appeals to make an exception. And I have cases, well, that where a building might have, show the general public sees the parking. They may choose to purchase a building based on the parking. Only when it's brought to code, they're asked to remove some of that parking. And it just, I think just from the general public standpoint, it'd be good to have more discussion about it. And again, we wouldn't want to pass something and then add more of a potential workload to the BZA, just to try to overcome it.
All right, so the motion is to remove all changes in table
4-10.
4-10. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Second.
All right, motion and second. Jackie, would you please call the roll on that motion?
Rodkey? Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Ballard?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
Seaboard?
Yes.
Cockrum?
Yes.
And Kinsey had to leave, so that's 8-0.
All right, so that motion passes. So now we are back to Z006-23 as amended. No changes to parking table. Do we have a motion? I think we are now ready to move that along. If there is a motion to forward that to the council and waive the second hearing.
With a positive recommendation, yeah.
I'm
With a
sorry?
positive recommendation, or
Yes.
whatever.
Well, that's up to whoever's making the motion,
Right.
but we can recommend to forward it to the council with a positive recommendation, negative recommendation, no recommendation. I think sounds like we're generally positive on it without the parking changes, so would someone like to make that motion?
I'm happy to make a motion to move ZO-06-23 as amended to the council with a positive recommendation, and,
Waive
what
the
is it?
second hearing?
Yes, waive the second hearing.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second then.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Jackie, would you please call the roll on that motion?
Yep. Smith?
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Yes.
Ballard, Burrell,
Yes.
Seaboard,
Yes.
Cockrum,
Yes.
and Rodkey.
Yes.
Thanks.
All right. We did it. We are now on to ZO07-23, our final petition for the evening.
And I'm going to jump in very quickly, just as a reminder, once the clock strikes 9:30 or just before it hits 9:30, if this petition is still being considered, the board will have to either vote to suspend the rules or adjournment will happen at 9:30, and we'll work to schedule a special session to finish
Right.
considering this petition, so.
Yeah. And just to underscore that, that means if we don't pass this or extend the time, we're coming back here in the next 7 days to do this again.
That's right.
So I know we're all hungry and tired, but it would be really great if we can get through this.
All right, ZO0723 is amendments to Chapter 6, Administration and Procedures. The petition deals obviously with processes and procedures and covers a variety of topics. So we have a handful, 5 or 6 amendments that extend the appeal period from 5 days to 10 days for various department or commission decisions, a recommendation from the legal department, I believe. We had a couple of unnecessary or duplicate regulations removed. We clarified when a change in use is required for a grading permit. And we clarified a couple of other things that were just written oddly, so that site plan expiration timeline of 1 year is, if you want to request extension, it has to be within that year. And for demolition delay expiration, that it is good for 1 year. Again, it was just written kind of poorly. The language related to grading permit exceptions is clarified, and more language related to lot line shifts, similar to what we discussed earlier tonight, but just in Chapter 6. We synced the period for saying that you have abandoned a site to a year, which is similar in another part of the UDO. And we have changed the requirements for site plan review such that if you are doing expansions over time, then they're cumulative. Because if you're doing an expansion that's under 10%, then you don't have to meet certain requirements. And we've seen a couple of sites where then it's multiple expansions, and so this would be cumulative over the life of, from our first UDO. Let's see. And then updating existing language related to the update of adjacent pedestrian facilities in the limited compliance situation to reflect the past practice and policy. So there are 21 of these amendments. If you want, I will briefly show them. Again, this first one is just one of the 5 to 10 day changes. This here, in this section, removing this requirement because it is covered basically by the other requirements, so it's redundant and not necessary. We had another 5 to 10 day appeal period on this page as well. Let's see. Here's where we had a reference that was incorrect that we updated, as well as taking out one of these triggers for minor site plan review because you can't meet it without meeting one of the other triggers. So again, just replacing something that was redundant. Doing some language changes to match the new state code for floodplain, which they now call it a flood fringe instead of a floodway fringe, so going through the code and updating that. Clarifying our 1 year period of approval for site plans, in this case minor site plans. But we did that for both major and minor. Another 10-day appeal update here, as many of our processes can be appealed. Clarifying the 1 year period for the site plan here. Another floodway update. see. This is one just using, updating old language where we used to say non-residential or single-family districts. We now say mixed use, and then we listed out the districts that applied for this particular regulation related to contributing structures. We removed some publishing requirements for demolition delay that we have not done because it is in the purview of hand to handle noticing for those. And then again, clarifying that a demolition delay approval from the HPC is only good for 1 year. And here, clarifying that if you're trying to treat the plexes similar to a single-family detached, so that land disturbing activity for those uses is treated the same as single detached and is exempt from grading permit requirements. This is what I was talking about, doing a lot line shift, clarifying. This is under exemptions because it's in the subdivision control portion of the code, and it's saying that you don't have to do a subdivision if you are within these boundaries, and I believe this comes generally from the state. We call it a lot line adjustment, and so just clarifying what requirements are needed in that situation in those two references there. And I think there's a couple more. This one is just a 5 to 10 change, and the next one is as well. Oops. Somewhere in here, there we go, the time limit change. Here we have, again, talking about abandonment for nonconforming use, going to a year. And the cumulative additions that I mentioned earlier. And then the last one is related to some, related to pedestrian facilities in a limited compliance situation. The way that the code is written, all of the facilities in front of your property need to be updated to meet the ADA. Past practice was that that actually only applied to curb ramps, and we have gotten some feedback and are changing that back to curb ramps explicitly to be clear. I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Seabour.
I guess just a quick question on the last item about the pedestrian facilities.
Yes.
Like we just, for example, reviewed maybe a different situation where there was a subdivision and it was a curb ramp was a discussion topic, but so was the driveway where there's maybe curbs. And I guess just curb ramps, I think, big picture, are the biggest issue that the city is required to address through different projects. But just curious if we really do want to make sure it's just curb ramps or not alleys or driveways or other features that could create issues for sidewalks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm not sure what you all would like to do. So I did consult with engineering staff to see if there was like a better term than curb ramps, because that is what we're trying to get to, like the intersection of the sidewalk with the vehicular space. So if there is a better term or more terms that need to put in, we're open to that. Curb ramps was what I got back from that discussion. We do want it to be limited because we've had a couple of projects where we tried to do the full bore based on what the language is and had some pushback, and the way that it used to be done was just those interfaces, and I think we're comfortable going back to that, talking to other departments, including the CFRD, Community and Family Resources. But yeah, if there's better language that incorporates more of that interface, we'd be happy to entertain it. We did ask, but I may not have been clear enough if there is another term that I don't know.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we will go to public comment on ZO-07-23. And
There's no public on there.
there is no public in the chambers and no public on the meeting, so no public comment on ZO-07-23. We are back to the commission for any final comments or a motion?
I'll move approval, or move that we advance ZO-07-23 to the Common Council with a positive recommendation and waive the second hearing.
All right, is there a second?
Second that.
Any final discussion before we call the roll? All right, Jackie, would you please call the roll?
St. John,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Seabour,
Yes.
Cockrum,
Yes.
Rodkey,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right, excellent. That is our final petition for the evening. Before we adjourn, quickly, I just want to make sure that we are giving staff the appropriate direction for what we're expecting at our next meeting. We had two amendments tonight. One was to remove the changes to first floor residential or non-residential requirements, and then the second was parking maximums. Are we expecting, is it, just quickly, is it your desire to have updated versions of both of those for our next meeting in April? Commissioner Cochran, is that your intention with your?
Yeah, I would like that. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody disagree that's what we're expecting? Okay. Well, I would just say that is a bit of a burden on staff, so I know I will do whatever I can. Spring break is next week, so I can't help next week, but any other chance I can, I'm happy to join in, and I hope we all will, because I know it's going to be some work to make sure we keep this moving. So, all right.
I do have one comment, final comment. I just want to thank staff, and particularly Ms. Scanlon, who walked us through 20 pages of changes and single-handedly led and facilitated. It was 6:30 when you started, and it's 9:05, and I know you had a little help here and there, but I just want to thank you for that work. These 20 pages are like 8-point font, so like it's a lot, and I just really appreciate that, because any comments made tonight about that might be perceived as lack of effort on the part of staff, I think tonight was a complete contradiction of that statement, so thank you.
Yes, agreed. Any final comments, announcements, questions? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.